Good afternoon, everyone. We are just starting a couple of minutes late, but we're letting people join here. Thank you all for attending. This is our How to Start Your Own Robotics Company. So for those of you who don't know MassRobotics, we are a nonprofit that supports robotics, the efforts of many companies. We run a startup facility here in downtown Boston, where we house over 65 startups. And we are always looking for companies that have that next great idea and that want to build a robotics company. And we provide a lot of support and facilities and resources around that. We're going to encourage you to reach out if you think you might be interested in joining MassRobotics. We do our effort and our work through the support of our partners. We have many great partners who do that, and we are excited to have them. And we'll show you more about that as we go on. We're going to turn it, oh, look at that, there's a slide right there. So these are our partners who as I mentioned, provide some of the funding that allow us to do what we do. So I'm going to turn this event over to Russell Nickerson. Russell runs a number of initiatives here at MassRobotics, including overseeing our lab and working with supporting some of our partners in many of the things that they do. And he's really instrumental in this effort. And we have a great lineup. I know it goes all afternoon, so there's a lot of speakers, but we cover a lot of ground, and hopefully you can join for either some or all of it and get up pieces of information that might help you as you think about starting your next company. So Russell, I'll turn it over to you.
Let's get on over here. Hey guys, thanks Tom. So our agenda today is covering many topics. So this is just kind of scratching the surface of starting a company. Obviously, you know, this is, you know, these things you could write, you know, doctorates on all these topics, but we're just going to touch on them. We hope to hold more in-depth like sessions and future deep dives kind of into these individually for different events in the future. So the sessions today will be recorded, and we're going to post it to our YouTube channel. So, you know, hit that bell, like and subscribe, you know the drill. And to kick off the webinar, we're going to hear from our partner and friend at Foley, Peter Rosenblum, to learn a little bit about the legal side of setting up a company, First Steps 101. So I believe, is Peter ready to go? You know, we can transition over to Peter. If he is not here, we can chat a little bit. Let's see, here we go. I think he's here, so I'm going to turn.
Sorry, I'm on now.
Hey Peter, you're on now? All right, you'll be up in a second.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Talking to you. Wish I could see more of you, but I can't. Our topic today is starting a robotics company, and I usually recommend that one of the first steps is to form some sort of entity which will act as the focal point for the company and for your operations. So Joyce, can I have the next slide, please? So one question you can ask is, why would you want to form an entity at an early stage? Seems like a lot of bother. It might even cost some money at a time when you have better things to spend the money on. So why would you do that? Well, there are a number of reasons, most of which in practice make a great deal of sense. So the first thing is that having an entity provides a focus for your organization. It gives you something that you can refer to when you're dealing with third parties. And frankly, it helps you get organized. And one of the issues that early stage businesses always have is getting organized. It's not like running your personal life, and you have to figure out how to do things. And having an entity that is the focus of things is a good place to start. It's also the case that if you're going to allocate ownership in the entity, it's frequently most tax efficient to do so just when you're starting out, you don't really have anything of value. You hear that people talk about getting founder stock for almost nothing. And the thing under the tax law that permits you to get founder stock for almost nothing is the fact that the company, when you're starting, really isn't worth anything. There's nothing in it, nothing going on, and you get your stock. You pay basically some small amount of money for your stock, and you're there, and you're an owner, and you don't have to worry about some of the big tax bills that can happen when you get bargain stock later on. Another reason for doing it is just ease of management of your business. Again, people want to do business with you. You need a bank account. You need an employer identification number. If you're participating in business plan competitions, you need an entity to hold out, and having your entity early is good. And then, of course, the next step is hopefully you will get grants and you will develop a lot of IP. And at some point, you're going to want to allocate the ownership of the IP. You're going to need to get it into an entity to hold that IP and move forward. Now, when I talk about intellectual property, I'm not just talking about patents. I'm talking about trade secrets. I'm talking about copyrights. I'm talking about trademarks. Having that in an individual name can be very difficult. And finally, having an entity provides a certain level of liability protection for you. If you're entering into contracts, the contracting party will not be you individually. So that will be a layer of insulation if something goes wrong. You won't be hiring the employees yourself. And if there are issues with the employees, in many cases, the company will be a modulating influence in between. That said, people do run relatively large businesses in their personal names. I actually had a client that was running a major store online in his own name, and it worked out up until a point, and he got to the point where it didn't make sense to continue that way, and he had some other things that he needed to do, so we incorporated him. And he'd waited a long time, so it created some complexity in doing that, particularly on the stock issuance side. Next slide, please, Joyce. So just when you think about an entity and you think about choosing the kind of entity you have, I noted down 6 considerations that you might keep in mind and when you're doing it, and which most people do. The first issue is limitation of liability. You want an entity that has good liability protection. Corporations do, limited liability companies do. Many of the other entities that you'd be talking about really don't. So you would be looking at one of those if you're interested in limited liability. You also obviously need to worry about tax treatment. And sometimes in certain kinds of businesses, typically not in early stage technology businesses, but in some businesses, the issue to have the company be tax transparent so that there aren't 2 levels of tax being paid when you have dividends or the like is significant. Again, with early stage businesses where they're typically running up losses while they develop their technology and their products, and will, in any event, if they're growing fast, will need all the cash they have to support receivables and working capital. You won't see a lot of the transparency be important, but it can be a factor. Cost and ease of organization is one of those things that I always emphasize for people. Entrepreneurship is hard. You don't want the legal side of your business to consume too much of your mind share, and you want an ability to run something that frankly works and makes sense for you. So the old phrase "no muss, no fuss" comes into play here. There are some rumors around about various different entities and what's easy and what's not, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Approaches to executive compensation are also important. And I say executive, but it's also employee compensation. Many people that you hire will want stock options. That's a problem if you have a limited liability company, because limited liability companies don't have any stock. They're not corporations, they don't have stock, and they can't issue stock options. There are things that you can do that look like stock options with limited liability companies, but they tend to be complicated and a lot of people don't understand them. Familiarity with the form is important. It makes all of the other things easier. You have reflexes that you've developed. You have a general idea of what company looks like with a board of directors and stockholders and officers. And to the extent that you're doing something that's familiar, that makes sense. And then finally, you have ease of management. That goes along with ease of organization. Again, you don't want to spend a lot of time worrying about the management of your entity. You want to spend it on developing your products and going to market. Next slide, please, Joyce. So my usual choice of an entity for a technology-based startup is a corporation. It's a relatively familiar form. It's got good liability protection. From a tax point of view, it's reasonably straightforward. There's no tax consequence usually for the stockholders. If the company has profits, it'll pay taxes. If it has losses, it can carry those forward, subject to some limitations in the law. It's pretty straightforward. On an ongoing basis, there will typically be a franchise tax payable somewhere, usually Delaware, and maybe some minimum taxes if you have some income, but it's not a big deal. Perhaps more to the point, this is the format that's expected by venture capitalists and many financing sources. Most of them will, by the time they come to you and want to give you money to invest, they will expect to see a corporation and they will have some ideas as to what that's going to look like. Disadvantages of a corporation: there's some lack of flexibility. If you have to change what you're doing somehow and decide to go to a limited liability company or a partnership of some sort, corporation can be difficult, but that usually isn't a big problem, and there are ways around the difficulties. And then, as I said, if you're paying dividends and have profits, you'll have two levels of cost for taxes. Limited liability company, an LLC. By the way, I always emphasize it's not a corporation. It's not a limited liability corporation. It's a limited liability company. And in some ways, it's very different from a corporation. It was originally developed by some folks who wanted to have both good liability protection and pass-through tax situation. So it tends to be a good vehicle for an investment management business, certain kinds of consulting businesses, and certain other kinds of businesses. It tends not to be a particularly good vehicle for a startup technology business, with one exception. Sometimes people decide when there's only a single member in the LLC, that's only one owner, that they'll use it just to start up, because at that point it's reasonably simple. The problems you get is when you have more than one owner, or when you want to start doing certain other kinds of things with the business, and the single owner LLC soon becomes relatively obsolete. The general advantages of the LLC: pass-through treatment for tax purposes, good liability protection, and if you like corporate titles and organization, there's a way to organize them so that they look like they're corporations when people are talking about them. You just have to remember that that's inconsistent with the statute, and you're basically walking around a statute. Next slide, please, Joyce. As I mentioned, they're very easy to organize and operate if there's only one owner. If there's only one owner, it's easy to convert to a corporate format. But keep in mind that if there's only one owner, it's not just that they're transparent for tax purposes, they're actually disregarded for tax purposes. And that means that all of the attributes of the entity for tax purposes go on your personal tax return, and that can get rather messy and unpleasant. Another reason why even having a single owner LLC is probably not the best thing in the world for a tech business. Disadvantages: once you have more than one owner, an LLC can be quite complex. There's a need for a customized agreement. It's called an operating agreement, and it can be a relatively long document because you're trying to and take a while, because you're basically starting almost from scratch to figure out what you want to be in there. It's not like a corporation where there are a lot of pretty well-defined rules as to what you're going to do, and everybody has single expectations. The real complexity comes in when you have to deal with the tax rules, which are a condition to the pass-through treatment, which again is one of the reasons you're doing an LLC in the first place. The way the tax rules work, they require something called capital accounts. I won't drag you through what they are, but that creates complexity because you have to follow a series of IRS rules in calculating the capital accounts and maintaining them. They're designed in the IRS's view of making sure that everything has substantial economic effect. The result of that is, though, in practice, if you're doing it right for a multi-owner LLC, you're going to want to have 3 sets of financial statements. One will be the capital accounts under the IRS rules. Another will be IRS tax accounting, which, believe it or not, is different from the capital accounting. And the third are the standard, generally accepted accounting principles, financial statements. That's why when someone tells you that and the need for the operating agreement, that's why when somebody tells you, oh, form an LLC, it's easy and simple, it's not. If you do it right, it can be very complicated and certainly more complicated than a corporation. You don't have stock options in LLCs for the reason I mentioned before. There's no stock. And the big problem in operations is it's very difficult to explain the tax rules, the capital accounting, and the way the operating agreement works to employees and others. It's often the case that if you have a significant LLC with multiple owners, only about 2 people in the organization really understand what's going on in the LLC, and that's not a good model for having happy people. There are specialized situations where you would have LLCs and they would be useful, certain platform companies in addition to what I mentioned before, but usually it doesn't fit the financing model of VCs, and they'll force you to convert to a corporate form. I mentioned S corporations here. Some people talk about them. They used to be very popular before LLCs came into being. They're corporations with pass-through characteristics. There are rules that you have to follow to qualify for an S corporation. In practice, we seldom see them. There are a couple of situations where you would have them, but usually it's just a C corporation, particularly if you start with a company that has losses and not a lot of investors coming in who can use the losses in their tax returns. Just S corporations have gone out of style. Next slide, please. Okay, so the big question, the next question is, you know what kind of entity you want? It's probably a corporation. Where do you organize it? Well, believe it or not, the answer is Delaware. And Delaware has a very substantial market share of all of the corporations that are organized and operating in the United States, and certainly of the new ones that are starting up. And why is that? Sounds a little weird to go all the way down to Delaware for incorporation. But the answers are pretty straightforward. It has a modern statute and laws that apply to the corporation. Statutes are updated regularly. The bar pays a lot of attention to it. The statute itself, because it gets so much attention, is comparatively straightforward to apply. It's amazing the number of people, lawyers that I know, who look at the Massachusetts corporate statute, for example, and conclude that they're lots better off in Delaware. And in fact, we very seldom are called upon to form Massachusetts corporations, even though maybe a long time ago we would have been forming a lot of them. In dealing with Delaware, there's a surprisingly large number of people, in addition to lawyers, who believe they understand the process and laws in Delaware, and that helps. Delaware is also expected by financing sources that you go to, particularly those out of state. They build their business model around having companies that look about the same from a legal point of view, and they expect Delaware because it's a nice unifying factor. And in contract situations, sometimes it's accepted as a neutral jurisdiction that people just accept to govern the contract, even if they're not that familiar with the Delaware corporate law. And finally, if you need it, and I hope you don't, if you need to go to court, the courts in Delaware are very experienced in dealing with corporations and other entity forms. If you look at the backgrounds of their judges who deal with that, it's very significantly oriented toward a corporate practice, which is what the state is known for on the legal side. Whereas if you look at the judges in many other jurisdictions, indeed, I would say most states, they have corporate issues only occasionally, and the results are seemingly more unpredictable as a result of that. Next slide, Joyce, please. So one of the big questions that comes up when you're getting started is how should founders allocate ownership in a startup? And I'm cheating here a little bit. I mentioned the issue, but it's a complex subject which is worthy of a program itself, and I'm not going to try to deal with it directly. The couple of things to remember is it is a complex situation. There are human interactions involved, but there's also fairness to those who are creating the value. Remember that when you're talking about having a partnership among some people, partners don't always have equal interests. And in fact, you need to allocate, just for the benefit of the company, you need to allocate ownership based on contributions. Be very wary about exchanging proposals for ownership in email. Believe it or not, you can form a binding contract through an email or any kind of electronic communication. And many people get into trouble by having what's really a proposal, it's a trial balloon, be treated as a binding contract, which is enforceable. You're also going to want in a startup to have everybody's ownership be subject to something called vesting, which basically means that if they leave, they forfeit part of their stock for very little money. It's designed to make sure that the people who create the value are the ones who are with the company. And you should not be allocating ownership until you've also worked through how everything's going to vest and who's going to be entitled to what and how much their sweat equity is worth. That's all I'll say on the subject. I hope I get a chance to talk to some of you again about this subject, but it's one that you can spend a lot of time on. I'm a mentor at the Venture Mentoring Service at MIT, and we spend a lot of time worrying about that. Next slide, please, Joyce. And then this is on my way to the last one, which is when should I hire a lawyer? And everyone is sitting there thinking, uh-oh, I can't afford a lawyer, or I don't like lawyers, or lawyers are going to make everything complicated. Maybe true, but my advice to people, and obviously I'm a lawyer, so I'm a little bit prejudiced on the subject, is that you should be looking about establishing decent legal relationships as early as you can. There are a variety of ways to get legal help that are useful from people who know what they're doing without breaking the bank and worrying about it. For very attractive new startups, a lot of the firms actually have the possibility of starting out on a total deferral basis and not having people pay. So think about hiring a lawyer early and explore the ways that can be done and get to somebody who knows what they're doing. And that gets me to my last slide, I think, which is to say thank you. Thank you for listening. And that's who I am and where I work. Did we have any questions?
Excellent. I like to add thanks. I thought, I thought vesting was, part of a three-piece suit, but, what do I know? So it's interesting. I think a lot of students and people starting out, when they think of even starting a business or getting their feet wet in they think they have to get hired by a company to consult and things. And I usually advocate and say you can go to your local city and get a DBA, which is a doing business as name for a fee, and you can operate as a sole proprietor, which is just a single entity. It's like really the lowest common denominator. And you're really acting as yourself. You still have to, heed the same things directly, like Peter mentioned. But it's interesting that a lot of people don't realize that, that's an avenue to go, and it's actually not that expensive. It's really kind of the I would call it the lowest bar, right? Would you say that, Peter, in terms of entry into like the workplace as some type of entity?
Well, the problem with that is that the DBA doesn't provide any protection for you from liability. It just gives you a name to use, and it's still just you acting on your own. The entity that I mentioned that our client ran as an online store as a sole proprietorship for years used a DBA, but all of the contracts effectively were in his name. All of the liabilities were in his name. All of the problems were in his name. And even more to the point, he wound up with one of the goriest tax returns you've ever seen, because he had all of his cost of goods sold on there and bad receivables and things like that. It's for a pure consulting business, you may not need an entity. You're acting as yourself and you're out there doing it. But if you're planning a robotics business that's going to develop a lot of technology, build up sales, bring in financing, etc., you probably want to start right and start focusing everything and really start getting the IP either ready to go into an entity or in the entity itself, so that you're moving forward. And more to the point, so that many people who are involved with it can't claim it at the same time. One of the things that the putting in the entity does is the entity is the owner, and you can look just to who the stockholders are for who own ownership. Otherwise, you have one of these things where everybody's claiming the technology and nobody knows who really owns it, and that will be a problem down the line. So yeah, for a consulting business, if you're just hiring yourself out as a consultant, proprietorship makes sense. For other kinds of businesses, probably not.
Yep. Great. All right. Thank you, Peter. We discussed many possibilities to follow on these tops, including like things your lawyer didn't tell you and tricks and traps. So hopefully maybe we can have a panel in the future. For now, though, we're going to move on to Cait Brumme, who is the Senior Vice President of MassChallenge Early Stage. Also, congrats, Cait, on your 50th Accelerator program. We're happy to see you. Southeast, Spiral, two of our MassRobotics residents as the newest 2021 US cohort. So yeah, thanks, and we'll start talking now about marketing, right? That's what. All right, I'll leave it to you. Cait, you're muted. Sorry about that. Still can't hear you right now. Let's see. Sorry about this. We're just reloading.
All right.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry about that.
No, sorry.
All right. Well, I was just saying how excited we were, as always, to see awesome companies from the MassRobotics family, and we will be planning to send more over. All right. So should I dive in?
Go for it.
Great. Well, thank you all. I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about market research customer discovery. Just to put in context, I'm with MassChallenge. We're a global nonprofit which works with bold entrepreneurs disrupting the status quo. Through our no equity accelerators, we work with over 400 startups a year. I'm US focused, where we work with 230, including our 2021 cohort. So, let's dive in. I think, first of all, before we get into the mechanics of customer discovery, market research, I like to frame it up in two ways. One is we think of startups as experiment machines with a great idea and pursuing answers to the question, should this product be built? And that's is there a customer problem that's worth solving? And then what's the sustainable business model for the solution if that's the case? And that's, will customers pay, and will they pay enough to cover the cost of bringing that solution to market? And so this, this experiment machine framework is helpful in a couple ways. One is it gets founders focused on the problem and the business model, not just the technology and the solution. We work with a large number of founders who come from technology, engineering, even academic backgrounds, and it's really hard not to lead with the invention or the technology. And so, starting with the understanding that you're really going through a process of validating is a helpful starting point. The second thing, and here I'll send around slides after so I don't distract pulling them up, but we think before getting into the sort of which experiments do I run, startups need to understand where am I in the journey. We've, over the course of our history, sort of built out a framework that we call the 4Ds, which help put into context the stages that a startup will go through. So the 4Ds for us are discovery, development, deployment, distribution. At the discovery stage, you're validating your idea, and the sort of primary area of focus for you is really nailing that customer pain point and understanding the solution value proposition from the customer perspective. The development stage is around validating the solution in the market. So again, you're going deeper on the value proposition and also around the customer willingness to pay. Deployment is where you're starting to validate the business model. And so looking to test, refine, prove out the go-to-market motions, the pricing, and also the solution features that really matter. And lastly is the distribution phase, which is, validating the path to scale, that go-to-market, the solutions that matter, and sort of adjacent categories you can tackle. And the reason we've paused to lay out this framework, and I think that MassRobotics invited us to share it here, is because we find that, if you're not clear on where you are in the journey, it's very easy to get ahead of yourself. And actually, I just jumped off a call with some members of our early stage accelerator who were saying just that, which is, here I was thinking, we had developed the solution and we went to sell it and realized, oh, thank you so much, Joyce. We can jump to slide 4 and realize that we hadn't actually done the market research and the customer discovery work that we needed to validate that customer pain point. So if you just want to jump to the next slide on number 4, this will, put it in context, and I'm happy to share this later because having a visual is nice. And so, here, when sort of thinking about market research, customer discovery, again, I wanted to put it in context of like where this happens in the startup journey and also why it's so important. And so again, where it happens is at the early point, because you need to be able to articulate the real customer problem from their perspective. And also, how will they use it? How much will they pay? How strongly will they advocate for it? And so this is sort of the work of the discovery and the development phase startups. From our data, discovery phase startups typically have 1 to 3 team members. They may have raised some small amount of funding, may have an MVP or prototype out in the market, and we strongly encourage them to get one, because the best way to do customer research and discovery is actually sort of touching, feeling, working on a product with your customers. So we can jump to the next slide, and I'll share a couple of thoughts on sort of what market research is and is not. And then I know these are sort of short flash talks, so I'll pause in case there are any questions before 1:45. So, market research is primarily the act of trying to answer the question, should this product be built, from the customer perspective. And so what it is you have an informed hypothesis of a customer pain point. Startups are built on the vision of founders who see something others don't. So that is super important. And it's the process of getting feedback from the customer on like how accurate is your vision, how accurate is your understanding of their pain point and what they'll work on. Today, this has been sort of heavily advocated for in the lean startup framework, is like you want to get your MVP or a prototype into the hands of customers for real world feedback as quickly as possible. So, while there is a process of interviewing customers, engaging with them around the topics of, would you be interested in something if, or tell me about this problem, or how does your budget process work and how much do you pay? Like all of those sort of desk or interview based research are informative, but the real feedback you'll get on the validity of your product and your solution is going to be from seeing how customers use the solution or don't, what's important to them, where it would fit into their own cycles. We strongly encourage, again, for startups to not wait until they have 100% conviction, either on the customer pain point or on their solution before they get in market. Again, one of the challenges or misunderstandings we see is that founders want to have something that is perfect and that they're super proud of, and so they sort of hold the solution tight, tinkering and optimizing in the shop, if you would, rather than letting their customers provide the feedback and kick the tires in a way that helps drive it forward. So one of the sort of best versions of this I've heard recently from our keynote speaker on Monday was that you want to be directionally right on the customer problem, but not 100% there. Because if you wait to be 100% there, you'll wait too long, and that dramatically increases the chance you've spent resources, whether that's your time or financial or other, developing something that customers will ultimately reject. So just, quick summary on closing, like the market research and the customer discovery work is the most important work that discovery and development stage startups will do. Ideally, it is getting feedback, both spoken, written, but also sort of observed on how customers are engaging with your solution and how it solves their problem or doesn't, so that you're in a better place to refine your hypothesis, iterate on the solution, and then either optimize or pivot before you expend too many resources. So with that, I will pause, and if there's time for questions, I'd be delighted to answer any.
Thanks, Cait. Yeah, I think we'll keep it going. I want to thank you for the presentation. It's interesting to see sometimes, some startups, or you're chatting over beers with somebody, and they're like, "Hey, what if we had robots that cook for everyone?" And then you say, "Okay, well, how much would they cost?" $50,000. Okay, who has $50,000 to spend on cooking robots? So there's a market for that. However, it's smaller initially than people might think. So it's interesting to get that kind of visual, understanding of what your market is, who you're selling to. So very important. So yeah, thank you. Thanks, Cait.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you. So next up, we have Linda Thayer, partner at Finnegan, so one of our partners, and a longtime supporter of the robotics community, to share information on IP, patents, and trademarks, which is quite interesting. So take it away, Linda.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. I'm also going to share my screen here. I have a couple slides to talk about, and please, if somebody could tell me if they see the screen. Do they see the screen?
I see the screen. Yep.
Yes? No?
Yep. All set. We can see it. We see the next slide too. So just be aware.
Great. Okay, because for a minute there it said I was muted by an organizer. So if I'm okay to go, then I will go on with my slides here. Well, hi everybody. I was listening intently to the previous speakers because they talked about the and a few things that I'm going to touch on here, but mostly I'm going to talk about IP and why IP is important and different types of IP. The IP is important because of it actually gives value to your company. It protects it can attract investment if that's what you're interested in. Down the road, it could be a source of revenue, but most of what IP does is it puts a fence around your area that you're able to operate in and gives you some amount of exclusivity in that market, some ability to keep others out of a particular area or to prevent them from competing with you in that area. These other things down the road, the preempting attacks by competitors because of potential cross-assertion or cross-licensing, collaboration, and other things. Those are also reasons to file for IP. And it, maximizes your acquisition value. Some of the investors see the IP as a sign that you have a protectable, investable, unique idea. So what are the types of IP? Well, when we're talking about intellectual property, there are several types. There's the patents, which could be either a utility, design, or plant patent. In the robotics field, you don't have a lot of plant patents, but you may have design and or utility patents. Trademarks should be used as part of your brand. Trade secrets are for things that you want to keep as proprietary, essentially, and copyrights are the fourth type of IP. So focusing first on what is a patent, it's important for you to know that the patent that you get, it does not give you rights to make, use, and sell, but what it does is it gives you the rights to prevent others from using, or selling a product that's described in the claims of your patent, and to stop others from doing so if they start doing that. Patents have a limited term. US patents have a 20-year term. Design patents have a 15-year term. And it's important to know that patents are geographical in nature, meaning that if you want to exclude people from doing something in the US, you need US patents, US IP. If you want to prevent them from doing it in Europe or Japan, you need patents that cover those geographies. You can get patents without ever commercializing. So patents are to protect ideas, and utility patents are used to protect ways of doing things or actual physical devices, such as robotics or software which operates a robot. So it's important to understand the difference between a utility patent and a design patent, but both could be part of your arsenal. A design patent protects the way something looks, and utility patents is the way it functions, the way it works, and they have different terms. You probably heard about both in the Apple-Samsung smartphone wars, because there were utility patents involved, which to things like the bounce back and the pinch to zoom, because those are ways that the phones worked. There were also patents involved on the rounded corners and the shape of the patent and the user interface, the way that the screen looks and the appearance of the icons. So patents are very valuable. So this is planning a little bit long term, but the bigger companies, they are a line item. They're an asset. They're sold. They're they are sometimes the most valuable asset that your company can own. Here's just a couple of deals where the patents ended up being extremely valuable. Trademarks. So trademarks can be a word, phrase, symbol, or design that identify the source of the goods, and they're part of your branding, business branding. Now, an owner of a trademark can prevent someone from copying the trademark. The one question that I frequently get asked is the difference between when you can use an R, when you can use TM and an SM. And R means that your trademark is registered with the U.S. Patent Office, and you can't use that until the trademark is officially granted. You can use TM and SM. TM means is used on goods. SM is less used, but it's denotes a service mark. And you don't have to have even applied to use those. You can, and it is, they don't offer you any protection, but they offer you a way to put the public on notice that this is a mark or a name or a slogan or something that your business is thinking is something it belongs to you. Here's some examples of what you can trademark. And it's pretty wide open, so you should consult an attorney to figure it all out. I can't go through all the absolute options that you have for trademarking, but sounds, smells, your domain name, like Amazon.com could become part of your trademark. The letters, the shape, the colors, pretty much there's a lot of things that could be trademarks. Some people talk about trade dress, the difference between trade dress and trademark. Trade dress is part of a trademark or included in the category of trademarks, but it tends to refer to more the shape, the color, the size, so it's more used to apply to packaging, product design, overall shape of a bottle, or many of these things together. Your trade dress is all of those things together. That's how that term's used. Trademarks are also valuable. So here's a slide that shows the estimated brand value of some of the more recognizable trademarks. Copyrights is another thing, is another part of the IP arsenal that is pretty much original works that could be literary, musical, dramatic, pantomime, all those things. Something that robotics companies don't often have, but it could apply to your literature. It could apply to software. Software can be copyrighted, so that's something to consider. Now, what copyrights do is they give you, and copyright, any original work, you can put a C with a circle around it, meaning that you're reserving the copyright. It's there is a registered copyright, which means you've provided a copy to the government and paid the fee to register your copyright. But you can put a C with a circle around any original work that you have. A copyright gives or protects your piece of original work from being reproduced or distributed, or copy or distributed works. And in the case of software, for example, it prevents verbatim copying of software. It does not prevent another entity from having software that performs a similar function if they use different code. That would not necessarily be a copyright violation. There is some, there would have to be an analysis of how much was verbatim, how much was copied, something like that. Trade secrets is something I get asked a lot about also. And when should I patent something, which means that you file it with the government and it eventually becomes public? And when should I keep something as a trade secret? Well, a trade secret is any piece of knowledge that has economic value, is not generally known, and that is protected by the company as a trade secret. It's important to know this because trade secrets get value only if they're protected. And so I think the term is bandied about a lot, that the companies all have trade secrets, but when you actually get down to it, it's things that like the recipe to Coca-Cola, for example. I mean, that's written down, it's in a safe, few people know it. And it's protected like it is a trade secret. It's not just all the corporate information. It is, so that's something where from the very beginning, you have to make a list of what you consider to be trade secrets, stamp them as trade secrets, restrict access to them either digitally or electronically or in paper form, and actually treat them as trade secrets from the very beginning for them to keep trade secret protection. So that's something that a lawyer could help you sort out if you actually have trade secrets. Here's an example that we like to show about, the Coke bottle is a good example to show the difference between the IP protection. The recipe, as I said, is a well-used trade secret because there's, limited access, only a few people know it, and it's been protected since its beginning as such. The trademark is the name. The trade dress is maybe the bottle with the stylized letters of Coca-Cola as a package. There is some copywriting of the text that's on the back of the bottle. The design patent could be and was, I believe, filed on the back on the actual shape of the bottle because it's very distinctive. And a utility patent could be filed on the method of making the bottle. That's the the actual utility of the bottle itself. If there hadn't been prior bottles, then maybe they could have gotten one on that. So IP takeaways, though, it's important that IP rights can be lost if you make too many things public before they're protected, particularly patent rights. It's very important to think about IP from the very beginning, to keep your eye on what is your inventive concept, what's your distinctive, what distinguishes you from other products, other entities, and actually take some more steps to protect and not give away those distinctive features as you're developing your product. I know money's an issue at the very beginning. We talked with, I guess it was Cait that talked about, you want to, from the very beginning, think about what problem you're solving, and get some customer input about that. I think the suggestion to think about the problem that you're solving from that perspective from the very beginning is something that's key to the early stage of your business. Some companies actually do a freedom to operate analysis before actually developing their product, meaning they look around, they search patents, they see what other companies have already protected. You may not want to get very far down the road and realize that another company who's very big has a lot of patents that's going to stop you, sue you, whatever. So you may want to do a little bit of freedom to operate analysis before you get too far down the path. The point about consulting an attorney early in the process is they will warn you, as it says here, or I guess as Peter referred to earlier, there's documents in the early formation of your business that you want to take IP into consideration. One of them is the ownership of the IP should be addressed in the employment agreements. And when you're forming the company, if you form the company first, then any IP that's developed after that can be owned by the company, the corporation. It can be assigned to the corporation. Employment agreements usually say that if you're working together on a solution and you invent while an employee of the company, that it's owned by the company. So the sooner that you have those kinds of agreements in place, it makes inventorship and ownership of the IP a little less messy. The other thing to be aware of is that, as I said earlier, some ability to patent or claim your IP can be lost if there's public use before there's actual application for patent. So it's important not to publish papers, do beta testing, do actual market testing, as Cait alluded to, if you have a fully formed product before you don't want to do that before you've applied for IP, because it may interfere with your rights to claim and get patents on that in the US and around the world. So with that, those are the highlights of IP, and I would take any questions if anyone has any.
There is, we're a little tight in time, but there's one question. Could you give some examples of IP in local robotic startups, especially patents?
Some examples of local.
So intellectual property in local robotic startups.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I know IP's been key to, let me see if I can stop sharing here. I know, I'm sorry, where's this? People can see your screen, click to stop sharing. I know IP's been key to several, one of the best stories is Kiva had patents on its robotics, and that was one of the reasons that their patents were chosen by, am I getting this wrong? Amazon Robotics when, yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I've heard that story over and over again, and that they were looking for a partner, and one of the reasons they chose Kiva was the strength of their IP portfolio. And I don't have any other examples at the current time of that, but.
Yep, that's all right, that's great. There's a few more questions, but we should probably get to the next thing, so we'll kind of answer them in post. But thank you so much, as left a lot of interest about patents. Thank you so much, Linda. So next up, we have Mark O'Toole. He is the Group Vice President of Public Relations and Content at Mower Agency. So another of our partners. Mower has been our marketing and PR agency since MassRobotics was just a concept. So they really helped us out here. And they helped shape and brand who MassRobotics is today. So Mark will share his thoughts on marketing and branding. So probably a little bit different than earlier with Cait. So that's like more market research. This is more actually marketing and getting your brand out there. So I'll let Mark take away.
Awesome, thanks, Russell. And actually, there's probably a lot of similarities both from what Cait said and just even the recent IP presentation. There's some things that we have in common as well. So. There's a lot to cover in marketing and branding and PR. I'm not going to be able to cover it all in our 15 minutes here, but hopefully this is a high-level overview that gives you a good sense of at least a place to start, when to start, kind of resources you might want to start thinking about, and some exercises you might want to start thinking about as your company actually becomes a startup or gets to the point where it needs some marketing. Share my presentation. All right, so do you even need branding and PR? I'm assuming at some point that answer is going to be yes. It won't always be, really depending on what your organization is trying to achieve, but for the most part, you're going to need some kind of public presence at some point. So there's some concepts to consider, some elements you should put in place, and some consideration you should give to telling your brand's story, your startup's story. So we've been doing this at my company for a long time. As Russell said, we've been working with MassRobotics from the start, before they even had a name. So we've been deep into the robotics industry as well, and hopefully some of those learnings come through here. So you've got a startup, or you're thinking about a startup, pretty cool. You probably have a million other things to think about. Marketing may be way, way down on your list. You've got tech to worry about, testing, staffing, funding, deployment, but at some point, marketing. And when that might be, we'll talk about that a little bit during this conversation as well. Sometime to consider when to implement marketing is you may be moving kind of away from a concept or the lab to a commercial offering, or you need some kind of public presence to pursue grants, maybe if you're taking an R&D approach, or if you're looking for funding from VCs, or even to attract talent. It's hard to get people to come work for you if they can't even see what you're about. And that is the wonderful thing about the internet. We can find out just about everything about everybody these days. So at the highest level, what are we talking about? There's, you could argue with me about what's falls under these buckets. But I think for the purpose of this conversation, these are the three buckets that you're probably most concerned with as you're starting to start your company. And I would suggest probably even in this order. So the branding of your company is kind of it's kind of your look and feel. So what's your name? How were you able to secure that name? Is there a URL that's close enough to your name? That's really hard to do these days. Are there any legal complications? Is your name or visual identity close to someone else in the robotic space or some adjacent space? Like minute details you wouldn't think would matter, but they actually do matter a lot. So you need your name, you need a logo, you need your visual identity. That could be colors or just some kind of mood or feeling or visual concept that you want to convey through your brand. And ultimately that presents itself in your website. So when you're kind of getting to the place where you're public, I would say these three things are pretty key to get you there. We'll talk a little bit toward the end about maybe how to get some of that done. You also are going to need at some point marketing materials. Now think of marketing as kind of your sales and sales support tools. So it might be product sheets, technical sheets, sales sheets, some kind of sales enablement, which are any kind of tools to help your sales staff, whether that's you or you're actually able to bring in a sales team, stuff so they can reach out. You may need advertising, you may not. Advertising takes a lot of form these days. It's not kind of traditional an ad in a media outlet. It could be banner ads on a website. It could be ads on LinkedIn or other social networks, Facebook, Instagram, outdoor. I mean, there's lots of places to put your name these days. Google search, all sorts of places. And then finally, public relations, which is really the tool for awareness building. It's your storytelling tool. It's your reputation management tool. So you want to kind of get a good hold about who you are and make sure everybody knows who that is. It's your marketing practice to help you develop content that again kind of furthers your story. And it's media relations, especially in the robotics trade. The robotics media outlets have grown significantly in the last few years. So there's a bunch to work with. And if you have a good story, they're great supporters of the industry and they're going to want to tell your story. So there are avenues for that, for those storytelling mechanisms. So when does branding and PR marketing matter? Again, I mentioned some things, so it's a little subjective, but here's a few things to think about. When you need to differentiate, let's say you're moving into a warehouse automation space. That's getting to be a crowded space. What are you going to do so you look different than everybody else there? Marketing will help you do that. When you need clarity, your story may resonate at a high level, but when you really start to drill down with your prospects and your customers, marketing plays a big role in kind of telling the specifics of that story. And when you need to define your identity, when you really need someone to remember who you are, whether that's from your look, feel, your story, all that stuff mixed together, use marketing, use PR, use branding. So at the highest level, again, recognizing you probably got a million things to do as you're starting to build a company. What's that strategy? What does that strategy look like? lots of aspects to consider. I just ran through the marketing, branding, and PR. There's also digital concepts to consider, social media. We talked about naming. So, you know, there's some really, hopefully these are simple, high-level strategic approaches. You may need some of this, you may need all of it, but you know, articulating your story really drives everything else in your marketing program, from your creative to your sales materials to your public relations approach. So 3 things to consider. I'm a big fan of what we call internally here a rallying cry. I think this is a great exercise to do. Whether this ever sees the light of day isn't critically important, but it's all about this aspirational message, because I think when founders start companies, they're often thinking about the features and benefits of that company, which is amazing. But what you really need to articulate is how you're solving a problem, specifically a problem that your industry recognizes as a problem. So that saves you a lot of groundwork if you don't have to come out and convince people there's a problem and that you have a solution. If you can find a problem that everybody already knows exists, and you're talking about that problem in a broad sense and virtually implying that you have the solution for it, that gets you a long way into getting into people's psyche. So we like to go through this rallying cry exercise. And what does that entail? Again, it's articulating this thing that can ultimately bundle all your messages together. It elevates your brand, moves you beyond that benefits and features, price comparisons, really high level. I'll share one in a minute with you, but something that can be embraced by and inspire your staff, your partners, your investors, your clients, the media, and think of it as kind of your swagger, your mojo. It's your way to kind of articulate yourself without necessarily talking about yourself. So way back when we did this exercise for MassRobotics, we came up with the rallying cry, "We bring robotics to life." Really broad. You see, it's not talking about, hey, MassRobotics, we have co-working space, we have all the tools robotics companies need, we have this great community, we can put you in touch with cool people. But really, at the highest level, we're bringing robotics to life. And if you're a potential resident or partner of MassRobotics, that's a pretty great place to start. And that kind of leads to everything else, from the name to all the assets to the website to the messaging. So really important, I think, to get your rallying cry done. Couple other things to consider. Mission statements. These, you don't necessarily have to do these, but at some point, especially as you start talking to fundraisers, I think this is important to be able to articulate a mission and a vision. So since we're getting low on time, I'll just quickly talk about these. Harvard calls this what the business is and isn't now into the future. That's your mission. You can see big brands have it. If you Google mission statements, you'll find a million examples out there. Conversely, you've got your vision statement, which is more forward-looking. What do you want to be down the line? And you know, some of the examples down here below, like I love IKEA's create a better life for many people. They don't talk about furniture or Swedish meatballs here. You know, their brand aspiration is just to make everybody's life better, unless of course you have to assemble IKEA furniture. But again, you can search this and find a ton of different vision statements out there. And I think those are in addition to the rallying cry, 2 kind of critical additional messaging elements you can do to really get your storytelling elements down right. So once you figure out your story, what do you do with it? Well, this falls more into the public relations bucket, but there's lots of places to tell your story. I just mentioned there's a lot of media outlets now, a lot of media outlets that cover robotics. Just do some searches, read stories where MassRobotics residents are landing, or bigger robotics companies, and you get a sense of who's out there writing and what they're writing about and ways you can insert yourself into that story. And there's general media and trade media. Social media is an amazing outlet. We tend to encourage people to focus a lot of their time on LinkedIn because that's where the business community is. If you have a very, very visual startup, use Instagram as well. Another great platform. B2B brands are embracing it more and more. Look at elements like podcasts. Spotify and everybody else is serving up a ton of podcasts today, which means there's a lot of podcast companies out there looking for content. There's a lot focused around the startup ecosystem, and they're looking for startups and founders with interesting stories to tell. And there's blogs, of course. And I like to say public relations has evolved into publish relations. I really think it's become more of a publishing and distribution platform than necessarily just kind of media relations and storytelling. But again, blogs, your own website, blog aggregator sites like medium.com, publishing press releases over wire services. And if you don't know what that means, Google it, you'll see a million wire service options. Forums where people are talking about things that could be on LinkedIn or they could be on trade media sites or some other Reddit or wherever. But again, there's lots of opportunities to write content about your organization and publish it somewhere. And at the kind of highest level, we do a lot of this publishing because we don't want to forget about SEO. Google is kind of one of your best business partners out there today. So the more you publish, the more Google recognizes it, and that could be everything from your social media channels to your blog posts to some of those external sites that I just shared. The more you're out there, the more Google recognizes you and the more Google rewards you. So SEO is critically important in all your marketing considerations today. Last couple of things, if you're starting to think about when to hire marketing resources, that's really subjective. I can't give you a great answer on that. You have two paths. You could hire marketing staff or an agency. You could do both. There's some agencies out there that really focus on startups. There's some marketing staff that's available on part-time basis for hire. So you have to really figure out your timing, what you can afford, because the costs really vary wildly depending on what you need. You need to be able to commit to the process. You can't hire staff or an agency, especially as a founder, and not be part of it. Otherwise, that effort's going to fail. So make sure you have the time to help make that work. And articulate your expectations up front before you hire anybody. So it's not just kind of a, you're disappointed at the end and everybody's got really defined expectations. Beyond this, there's sites you can find people on project-oriented basis like Fiverr. Again, you can Google these and find them. Fiverr, you can get logos done or probably quick website pages done. Upwork is another great place to find marketing talent or writers, but also keep in mind you get what you pay for. And if you want to build your own site just to get something up, Wix or Squarespace are super easy to use. You can make a pretty attractive site. Don't worry about getting into the more complicated website companies like HubSpot or WordPress or on and on. But look at Wix, Squarespace. I think you'll do okay there. So anyways, that's a lot. I know you got a lot to think about from a marketing and branding perspective, but hopefully that's some stuff you can think about as you're moving into a more kind of commercial presence.
Great, thanks. Does it surprise anybody that Mark has the coolest looking slides as like the marketer? So I don't think so. All right, so I think right now we're going to take about a 10-minute break. Feel free to eat your late lunch, have snacks, you use the bathroom. We're going to come back with a cool panel, so hang around, take a breather. Thanks, everybody. We're just testing out some audio and visual stuff. We'll be live in a minute or so. Trying to get it all. This right out. All right, so yeah, hi everybody. So getting business going requires funding. We've organized a panel discussion to help inform you of the types of funding, angel VC grants, contracts, all kinds of stuff, and the expectations of investors, and hear from successfully funded startups. So to moderate our panel and introduce our panelists, I'd like to introduce Yvonne McCague. Cait, okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. Managing Director at Silicon Valley Bank. So I will have her take it from here and enjoy.
Great, thank you. And, three fantastic CEOs that we couldn't think that are a better fit from this panel. Pison, Realtime, Robotics, and Autonodyne. And I'll pass it over for introductions in a moment as well. The concept of the panel is to help provide the audience with diversity of thought around various funding platforms, far beyond the traditional VC forums that we know a lot about. And we'll certainly touch on VC as we go through it as well. I'm also going to share a little bit about Silicon Valley Bank and how we can be helpful in the early stage of building a robotics company. But before I dive into that, I'd love to kick off with introductions on the panel. Dexter, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. My name is Dexter. I'm the CEO of Pison. We're a 40-person company based in Boston. We're creating neural interface gesture control, so allowing users to be able to use their hands by lifting up a finger. They would be able to interact with drones, robots, or mapping systems. And really, we're seeing that there's a lot of interest increasingly in the robotics and autonomy space, as well as with coming augmented reality. There are many companies moving on that platform. So we are a company that increases the accessibility of technology to allow a user to actually interact with it without increasing their cognitive load.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Jacobson, CEO of Autonodyne. We're a much smaller company than Dexter. We're also here in Boston, but our focus is at that intersection of human-machine interface and autonomy behaviors for basically enabling any uncrewed vehicle, air, sea, or land. We can have a very slick interface with humans moving the chess pieces around the board manually. We flunked, and conversely, if the algorithms are running very sophisticated algorithms, but the humans who are on the loop for the foreseeable future have no idea what the vehicle or vehicles are doing, that's also a failure in our mind. So for us, it's that combination of human-machine interface with autonomy engines. But it's all software.
So my name is Peter Howard, CEO and co-founder of Realtime Robotics. The company was founded in 2017 based on work that was done at Duke University, generating a breakthrough in robotic motion planning, which is how does a robot go from whatever pose it's in to wherever you want it to be without crashing anything into anything in between, including people, other robots, but the part that you're trying to work on, etc. The breakthrough was in how to do that in real time, meaning millisecond, single-digit millisecond level or better. We have that is used already today in logistics applications, automotive, even within the automotive space, even within the traditional welding robotics, which was a bit of a surprise to us. But it turns out that our technology allows you to completely automate the process of programming, even large multi-robot cells, and that's turned out to be hugely attractive to the automotive industry. And so that's one of the places that we have landed kind of both feet running in the last couple of years.
Thank you all. I know your expertise will be incredibly helpful to everyone here today as well. And just a little bit of background, I run Silicon Valley Bank hardware and frontier practice here in New England, where we have an absolutely thriving ecosystem in robotics and hardware as a whole. And it's a segment that the bank has committed to really double down on, both from the perspective of deploying capital to these companies in the early stage, but also to make sure that we're surrounding the ecosystem and the early stage founders, right? That's such a big part of the thriving economy here. And it's something that we do really well in the dividend market. And, you know, we do everything that you could wish for on the banking side of the house, from sort of credit cards for early stage companies and whatnot. But the real way that we add value to really early stage companies is more so around opening up our doors and our network. Our mission is really to do everything that we can to increase our clients' probability of success. And a lot of that is bringing the community together, connecting co-founders, CEOs to peers and like-minded and also very different-minded leaders in the space as well, and opening up our doors and our network to corporate ventures who may lead the next round. It may be some on the VC side of the house. We're also helpful with doing the right round of pitches, where to go to VCs for fundraising. We have our own angel network here in Boston, which is geared at connecting companies that are obviously looking to raise angel funding with those that have probably spun out of prior companies and really want to connect with those early stage founders. Because one of the challenges for some early stage companies is really understanding where to go for this fundraising, which is a lot of what we're going to dig into today. And I think a great segue there is if each of you could go through the fundraising path that you have chosen in your companies today, and then so beyond that, we'll start to dig into each one in more detail.
So Realtime Robotics, we started actually with money that I put into the company, so founders' money. And we've gone through kind of the full gamut. So the initial funding from founders to initial customer NREs to grants to government grants from both DARPA and NSF to additional customer funding for design and building products and essentially revenue, seed round financing, unpriced seed round financing, and then Series A financing. So roughly half of the money that has been used in operating the company to date has come from revenue, and roughly half of the money has come from investors.
Great. Super helpful, and certainly a diverse landscape there.
Following on how he described his funding pathway, so Pison started 5 years ago, 2016, and we raised about $11 million in VC over 2 rounds of seed and a small A. And we've been about 70% revenue funded as a company, and that is increasingly challenged as the team grows. And then also, it's increasingly that our prospects for having product revenue has allowed us to have that conviction to do it as well. And so we have started off with seed investors from the Boston network, from the finance industry. The audio company led our seed round 2 years ago, so there's a consumer strategic in play. And then with Incutel, which is a government-focused VC, come in play a number of months after that. And then more recently, 3 months ago, when we had our Series A, we had dual-purpose VCs that are interested in companies that have new technologies for government and defense tech that would also long-term lead to applications in the consumer world. And so what we've seen in terms of investor fit for us is the people who know that we are building very hard technologies that will take a while to incubate before our technology is fully realized among the masses, which we anticipate to be 4 or 5 years. But in the near term, we have huge demand for technology in the government. We've had nearly $20 million in contracts from federal customers for gesture control of drones, gesture control of augmented reality, and mapping systems, and also starting to look at the physiological impact of people doing different activities and how our data stream, which is capturing voltage and movement from the wrist with our proprietary signal processing manner, would be able to create an entirely new platform for understanding what's going on in the human, which there is no sensor for right now in a prolific manner. So our journey has definitely taken many pivots, And what we're targeting towards is the largest customers with the largest sort of recurring revenue opportunities, which are primarily in the government, what's called a PEO. And so how do we have our technology on 500,000 Army soldiers, for example, in a few years? And then how do we take that same technology, miniaturize it, lower the cost of it, and get it into a standard sort of form factor that any consumer could buy for augmented reality headset in a number of years from now. So we have definitely gone through a number of different sort of funding avenues as well, and business models that change accordingly as well.
Thank you. We'll come back to the user experience or recurring revenue. We'll touch on that.
Okay, so we have a different path. We have no outside investment, no venture capital, no funding that wasn't funded development, because we were lucky in that we were a spinoff of an existing company making avionics, for aircraft. I spent my formative years in the Air Force, and so all my peers who are still in the military knew what we were up to, and asked if we could take that technology and push it into the unmanned DoD platforms of the world back in the 2014 timeframe. So we tried an experiment, and it was wildly successful to the point where it was no longer sustainable to be wearing two hats, the main civil company that has nothing to do with this unmanned work, and a one-person company called Autonodyne trying to service contracts. So our path has been all about funded development, finding folks and opportunities, principally government funded, now to a lesser extent civil funded, to kind of jump from lily pad to lily pad as the pads get bigger and bigger and bigger. And whenever we've got extra discretionary income because of that funded development, we just roll it back into ourselves, hire more resources, and get that flywheel moving faster and faster. Yeah. So we're now at the crossroads, right, as so many companies are. Do you want to maintain this lily pad to lily pad funded development effort, or should you seek outside capital investment to really kind of accelerate that roadmap? So I think I'll be just as curious as everybody in the audience to find out, what that's like.
And I think now the audience know what I'm talking about when I say that I couldn't possibly think of 3 CEOs and founders that have a more diverse sort of funding expertise and backgrounds. And just before we dig into that, Dexter, you touched on hardware sort of being hard, and everybody knows that, but yet each of you were drawn to really fund these companies grow and scale, and despite knowing that, what is it that really drew you to this robotics space specifically?
It is the future, right? This is the unstoppable force. At least for the missions that we spend our time in, right? Everybody's probably familiar with the whole unmanned vehicles. We're starting off in the dull, dangerous, dirty kind of roles, and now it's just everywhere. It's just going to become so omnipresent. It's in every field, in every use case. Here we go. So it's good fun.
Yeah, everything that Steve says is absolutely true, and just a proliferation of everything in the world being digitized. And then actually what's quickly going to become the bottleneck in the world is how the human has access to it, right? So we already have, a really good smartphone in our pockets, and 5 billion people have smartphones in pockets. There's drones that connect to the smartphones. There's applications, there's IoT, everybody's Alexa or OK Google Home is connected through that network. And so really, how do we bring the human up to that game? And also how do we bring technology down to be accessible to the human at that human interface layer in a common platform with open standards. And so that is an inevitable trend that's already happening in terms of the singularity of technologies being overwhelming to human cognition. Is already happening. It's just, what are we going to do about it, right? We can invest in hardware platforms. We can invest in software systems that make that glue, that make them usable. And there's going to be the human system side to actually like help a person interact with those complexities on a day-to-day basis. So what we see, why we chose robots, is because all the user demand. We originally at Pison started off to help people affected by ALS. So there's a neurological condition that causes people to lose the ability to move their hands to control computers. My mother was personally affected, and that was my entire mission for why Pison was created, is to help people like my mother just click a mouse when she couldn't move her hand to do that. And then once we started shopping around this general idea, this idea of humans and physical capability being decoupled from electronic capability, then we just saw the problem set was huge. And if the problem set's huge, the opportunity is huge. And that's why we expanded our focus to think about consumer long term, but in near term, how do we get the MVPs out there in terms of products that with customers that want it today, even if it's early stage, that would actually be able to usher an entirely new way that humans and electronics interact with each other.
So our company was founded based on a conversation between two professors, one who asked the other. They were at a conference that was boring as hell, and they went for coffee and got to talking. And there was a computer architect, a guy who has spent his career focused on designing specialty processors for specific difficult to solve problems. And the other was a roboticist, MIT trained, did his postdoc at the Media Lab, who had focused in robotic motion planning. And but the computer guy asked the robotics guy, what are the, why is it that we don't, why aren't robots doing, why aren't they making my breakfast? Why aren't they doing all these things that we all saw cartoons, 30, 40, 50 years ago? Why is it that robots aren't able to do all this stuff? And the motion planning guy said, well, fundamentally, you can't get the robot to work in ordinary places because we can't plan fast enough. So they started working on trying to solve that problem. And came up with a solution. I came at it from a different direction, which is this is my fifth startup. The first two were in computer technologies. The third was in robotics and sensing. And the solution that we had come up with provided the ability to monitor the way the car was coming together in real time, adjust the robots in the way that they were placing and holding things during the welding process, but come to discover that it just wasn't possible to do that because the ability to adjust positions without engendering collision. There was no technology for doing that. So these guys had solved that problem. And when I heard about it, I said, I want you.
I'm already feeling inspired to start up a robotics company, but that's the answer for now. I think it would be really helpful as we start to dive deeper into these various forms of funding. We'll take them one by one from the earliest stage. So to help you, the audience, with actionable insights in terms of how they can really approach these. So as you thought of an initial angel funding, right, one of the questions is, where do you go? How does somebody know where to go if you don't naturally have a network? And one of the things I mentioned is that we have an angel and operators network here, actually locally in Boston, and indeed throughout the whole country, specifically designated for that. But any other insights that either of you may have around that in terms of going for that initial sort of angel and family and friends networks and make it easy?
I would say I wish I knew about Silicon Valley Bank at that time. But you had this connection that were great place to start. Family and friends, of course, is the traditional way to go, and that's the direction we took in this. In prior startups, I have generally gone through raise those initial funds from corporate partners. So it's kind of at the seed level.
Our journey for funding did come from people that I knew, and they were people who were interested in betting on me, and people who were interested in betting on the future of technology in the world, and recognizing that yes, there are a lot of problems that are coming with increased technology capabilities overall, and we don't know how it's going to unfold, but basically anything in this neural interface space is going to have a big play. What you've seen in the last 2-3 years is you've seen several big bets by the big consumer electronic companies, multi-billion-dollar bets on neural interfaces. And so we are a company swimming in this pond. And so it is playing out that the human body is incredibly important to be investing in, and that it's going to be a central part of all this, and it's going to be intersecting with robots. a great deal in non-robot systems. So that's how I started with people that I knew. And then ultimately then the MIT network was critical. The MIT network is very closely aligned with Bose, and that's how Bose learned about us. And then IncuTel heard about us from our customers. And so honestly, things were pretty organic, but our investors come from a wide swath of sectors. And maybe that speaks to the appeal and applicability of our technology long-term. In the near term, we're focused on being able to service our existing customers and have an inflection point with getting our technology into multiple programs of record. And so that's our goal as a company, but definitely the evolution of our business model has also evolved with how our investors can add value at the same time as well.
Well, I would have said I have no idea. In the last 6 months to 12 months, I'm fielding 5 to 10 calls or emails a day from people who want to invest in the company. So clearly there is a gigantic pile of folks, but I have no idea if I were on the receiving the kind of the starting end, where is the single resource or several resources to go? The good news is, turns out there's about a gazillion. I just don't know what they are.
And that's something that we can talk through too, or even happy to share now, is sort of a sense of understanding of where you actually go for some of this funding. And there are so many VCs nationally and of course globally, and the landscape is ever evolving. And we've seen more emerging managers in the past year than ever before. And we refer to emerging manager as a VC who is setting up a new fund, or maybe the first or second or third fund before they're really scaling and growing. So naturally we don't want robotics companies to be going to enterprise focused SaaS companies, our VCs, to fundraise, because they're unlikely to get that investment. So making sure that you're really focused and targeted is something that's really key. And we've got a really robust VC ecosystem that's focused on the space, indeed nationally, and also locally here as well. We have some fantastic names. Obviously the Engine, Bolt, we have Spark, NEA are pretty focused here as well. Hyperplane, General Catalyst, I'm almost afraid I'll leave somebody out, Killer, Underscore. And that's just a few to name locally. And we're always happy to make introductions to you to anybody that's seen here today, to sort of bridge that gap between people who are looking to invest and deploy capital and people who are looking to raise it. And Steve, you made a really good point. There is an abundance of capital in the market, more so last year than we've ever seen before. And we expect that trend to continue into this year as well. And one of the things that's fueling that is a variety of players and alternative sources of financing in the ecosystem, right? We're seeing a lot of new funding from family offices, for example, the SoftBanks of the world. PE firms are moving downstream. VC firms that were focused in Series D and E, they're now looking at the A's and B's because there's so much liquidity. It's a first world problem they have, but they're looking to deploy it, and it's becoming incredibly competitive from their perspective, which is a great time for funders to be funded. But we can certainly touch more on that too. But starting with sort of SBIRs and that landscape, maybe a really good place for the audience to understand how you've gone about that funding. How do you increase your probability of success of actually landing some of these funding mechanisms that I see you got to jump in.
I think anybody here have some experience, everyone here has experience. So it depends, the answer is it depends a little bit on what it is that you're trying to get funded. In terms of, do you go to NSF? You try to start with NSF. You try to start with DARPA. In our particular case, the original technology was funded through a DARPA grant, so it was natural for us to just kind of continue down that line. One of the things that I can say is, if you're going after NSF funding or DARPA funding, you really need to get to know the people who are putting out the calls for technology. You need to invest time in communicating to make sure that there's an awareness of what you're doing and the potential value of it that's not going to necessarily shine through just the application process itself. So, and I say that because where we did that, we were successful, and where we didn't do that, we were far less successful.
And for anyone who may be thinking of building a startup or starting a robotics company, you talked about getting to know the people that are putting in the calls. what are their best steps in getting to know them and identifying who those people are within these large organizations?
Well, so they're in the case of DARPA and NSF, it's a very formal, there are formal calls that are pretty easy to track down. I think if you're going through that process, you kind of do have to go through the motions of the process, but you need to be aware that making contact in, let's say, ways which don't call into question the reviewer's integrity is extremely important. But really just trying to get the message out about the value of what you're doing, and that can be either through yourself, but it's much better if it's coming through potential consumers of the technology that you're creating within the government fold.
So SBIRs have been a fantastic mechanism, contracting mechanism, dollar amount mechanism for Pison over the years. We did receive NSF funds, HHS funds, but ultimately we have a lot from the federal government relating to the services in the military. And what we've seen is that actually, so our phase 2 can have a cap of $1.7 million. You can have add-ons, you can have sequential phase 2s, you can have phase 3s as well. We were beneficiaries of, last year was the first time a program was launched called the Strategic SBR. And so we were only one of 21 companies that in the whole country, out of about 1,000, that the Air Force awarded this to, for the intention of putting 21 companies, on steroids. And so we received a $6 million contract relating to Air Force with 2 programs of record in our SAL. So we basically are on pathway to integrate into those. Actually, it's starting in a couple months. We're now into a year and a half into that program. And so that's the best type of R&D sort of funding, is that it is sufficient funding with firm fixed price that is competed obviously in a very competitive manner, but also aligned towards transition, meaning that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And so not all of those contracts that we have are like that, but this one has been excellent for us. And then it also was accompanied by letters, that memorandum of understanding from the what's called a PEO and a MassChallenge, saying that Pison's technology is game-changing, disruptive, and required. And so a requirement is a big deal, because that means that the technology, when it comes to fruition, is being utilized and it will become standard issue. And so we have that with the Air Force, and we're launching our first product in a few months to them at a number of their conferences. We already have requirements built that relate to drones, that relate to mapping systems. And ultimately we come, we happen to have been created at the same time that the innovation ecosystem within government was also willing to change how they did business and start aligning these SBRs with large program demand. And then also it's been a rather straightforward process to take that type of money and go towards what's called the O&M, operational and maintenance sort of money. And so we're excited for that progress right now. And the U.S. government has invested heavily into innovation. No other country has this type of program. And that's ultimately what gives this country a huge advantage. It allows a company like Pison to actually be able to accelerate our technology and have greater user impact in a matter of a few years rather than decades.
And when you secured that $6 million funding, did you have to raise a matching $6 million in equity?
Yeah, we had already done that. Yes, so there was a number of complexities where the government was trying to say, how do we incentivize a VC to also be involved to de-risk the tax dollars, right? So there was $6 million of investor commitment. Actually, we had $30 million of investor commitment over a period of years, and then also $3 million of Air Force customers money commitment, plus $3 million of SBIR commitment. So there's 3 tranches of money that had to be aligned, and then being able to execute that in a contract is also incredibly complex. So while these rules are really hard to follow for a startup or for any company, even a large company, in so many ways to trip over them, ultimately this is a very good mechanism if a company is willing to excel at playing this game and in being willing to be humble to navigate the system. But then we have ready customers with mechanisms to purchase in larger quantities at the end of the tunnel. And so any company in a serious manner using SBIRs is going to have to spend a lot of time learning how to execute them well. Otherwise, they will spend a lot of time, hundreds of hours, failing at it. So that's what we've done here.
And a lot of times something that founders and CEOs are not exactly blessed with. Any key resources, third parties that you utilize to help go through this process and really understand it and make sure that everything is written in the right way and helping to maximize that probability?
Well, we do have a few sippers, and I would declare that to be not entirely fair game. Yeah, so the two recommendations I would have would be, one, latch onto a company that has DoD contacts and similar to, and they will introduce you and show you the ropes. And the second one are these accelerators. AppWorks, Spark. There's a number of accelerators. In fact, there's probably like 3 within a half-mile radius of where we are right now. Right? That just the government has represented. And the accelerators are designed to bring experts and subject matter experts in to guide you through that process. So if you're not already familiar with that or part of an accelerator, I would highly encourage someone to jump into it.
And Steve, you may be a good place to start, and correct me if otherwise, in terms of securing defense contracts. How would you describe your overall experience in that end of the house as well?
Yeah, well, for us, that's the principal funding mechanism and source and vector for all of our work. And that opens up doors, which opens up more doors, which opens up more doors, and then it becomes the increasing snowball, which is fantastic. But I think, I come back to the latch on to somebody who's doing that right now, and they can be your guiding light through this Byzantine set of rules, or where the unwritten rules are, what the real likelihood of success will be, and how to maximize your probability. I mean, and that being said, we still put in proposals every single civil cycle, which are 3 or 4 a year. The DoD, the government's done a nice job of consolidating the DoD-oriented Navy, Army, Marines, DARPA, some of the DoD-like agencies all in one site with one announcement. So it's finally, that's been a nice consolidation of one-stop shopping place. The rules are published as far as how you participate, how you engage and submit your application. And that becomes a dice roll or an unfair game in about half of the cases, I think. And that comes down to largely who you know, which goes back to latch on to somebody. They'll introduce you to other folks. Accelerators will open doors. They'll introduce you to folks. And that's going to be the most successful path, in my opinion.
So in a scenario where we've gotten our grants or our angel grants, any type of defense contracts as well, the next step maybe, unless your customers are bootstrapping, seed rounds. So would love for the Dexter and Peter for you to share some of your experience that you've done in the seed rounds.
Sure, as I mentioned earlier, we had a number of people who knew about what I was doing, what our company, myself and my co-founder David were doing a number of years when we started 5 years ago, who wanted to join along for the ride. We have a lot of, I love all of our investors. They all add value. They're all really smart and keen with their industries, which are diverse technology. We have some people from major consumer electronic companies who have invested in us, in addition to our corporates who have participated as well. And it was for us a rolling sort of raise over about 1.5 years. And then ultimately, when we were looking for the right partner to sort of cap and price the round, then those arrived at that right time. And so that's how our seed round came together 2 years ago. But ultimately, people were coming in early, knowing that there was so much opportunity, and they just wanted to be involved. Now, at this stage, I have a couple dozen of investors. I have to be thinking about how I spend my time with them. I have to be thinking about which ones add value. And so there's disproportionate who adds value depending on the stage we're in. And so I spend a lot of time with our lead Series A investor, a lot of time. I tell him almost everything. And he's made intros to customers. He's Labrock Ventures based in Virginia as well. And they've made intros to customers, helped us with contracting, helped us find team members, helped us navigate different complexities. And Ultimately, the best type of partner is one who's going to recognize and help you solve your problems today, and also have seen this movie before 100 times and is able to help solve the problems in the years to come as well.
So I would, my own experience, I've raised money now in 4 different decades. And the first thing I would say is conditions change. The conditions for raising money today are quite different than they were 4 years ago when we raised our seed round. There is so much more liquidity and so much better awareness of the robotics industry. When we went out to raise our seed round in 2017, mid-2017, robotics was a hot place, but there were no success stories. So we wound up, like, as can happen, you kiss a lot of frogs. As you go through it, you begin to see a pattern of where you're getting traction, where you're getting interest. It would be great to have had a counselor at the Silicon Valley Bank that could have helped us at that time. But the fact is we are a deep tech hardware software play, and almost all of those words are, each of those words that I just stated puts you back, 10 feet in the fundraising. So after kissing roughly 100 frogs, we finally landed on about 3 or 4 that were enamored of what we were doing. And luckily for us, they also happened to turn out to be really, really supportive, kind of full service investors who like Toyota AI Ventures was the company that kind of intellectually led the round. And they have put together a fund that has continued to grow and develop as a super supportive company. I think when you're in a seed round, it's great if you get lucky and you do find, if you've got a line of investors that you can choose from, do your homework and make sure that you've got that you're finding the investors that are really going to be helpful, introduce you to customers, etc. If you don't have that lineup, you're just going to take what you get, and the money is okay.
Yeah, there are times when any money, when you're raising a company, any money is great money to have coming in, and then there are other points in time where it becomes so much more strategic to think about the partner, the evaluation of them, what it is they bring to the table in addition to just dollars. And they're often people that are going to really help you grow and scale the company. And it was remiss of me at the start not to ask everyone to chime in and put their questions in the chat box as well. We'll continue to monitor that. And we're going to touch on Series A in a second. And just to kickstart the engagement in the chat, let's ask everyone, what you think the average size of a Series A company is. And I'll send a bottle of wine to whoever gets the right answer close enough.
What's the typical size?
So we're looking back at 2020. Good question, very good question. So 2020. So we'll come back to that. So Steve, you were at the inflection point you talked about, whether you continue to bootstrap the company or whether you think about raising external sources of capital. Can you share with us? I'm sure there are many thought processes and dual processes going on through your mind as you think about the next best steps for the company and how you're evaluating the pros and cons to both.
My mind is a jungle. Boy, I don't know how to answer that one easily. I think Dexter talked about this Stratify vehicle. We actually just applied and are waiting to hear about a Stratify selection. And there's a couple of binary things. For example, if that falls favorably in our direction, that by itself is the equivalent of a major seed round or A or B series kind of investment. And so that would probably give us enough resources, more than we can handle, to scale the company. I think we were talking before today, every year since Autonodyne has existed, we've doubled headcount and revenue. We can continue to do that for a couple more years. You can pat yourself on the back, great job, and you've accomplished nothing, right? double to 5 and then 10 million and keep going, because we can't fundamentally move the needle the way we'd like to. And that is this crossroad, this inflection point we're talking about. For that we're sitting at right now, and we're spending basically the summer of 2021 trying to figure out what do we want to do and be when we grow up. Do we want to take that major step and change the philosophical approach that the company's had so far with respect to outside investment to make that big play? Yeah, and back to my mind is the jungle. Right? There are so many considerations that we're trying to walk our way through to figure out what it is. I presume these two guys, I know Dexter, we've known each other for a couple of years, and he spends a ton of his time trying to figure that kind of stuff out, right? And so that's not trivial. It's almost a full-time job to itself. I was trying to think through as I'm talking, what level of specificity could I provide to answer your question? Yeah, I don't have any.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
And no, that's helpful. And it might be a really good segue then for Dexter and Peter then to think through and share with us some of the insights that you had from raising your Series A. You said you sort of kissed about 100 frogs to land 5 investors. So it's a big time commitment, and it's so important for founders to make sure that they're going about it in the right way, and also understanding that you really just get one bite of the apple, and you do a really good job when you get the chance to get in front of these VCs. There's no leniency for you retired, or you said well, or you forgot your numbers. You get one shot and they're impressed or they're not, right? But any other words of wisdom that you can share? There's obviously massive trade-offs in terms of the expertise and the dollars and the runway coming into the company, trading off against the dilution. And dilution is a word that nobody on the phone here wants to hear, nor anybody ever wants to hear, but it's part and parcel of operating the company.
Complex topic. You threw a curveball in as well. So ultimately, the goal has to be to grow the company to as large and as fast as possible for any leader of a company. That's what the leader has to do. That's what all the investors generally want as well. For us, though, what I discovered is there are the 100 frogs to kiss. They will all take that meeting, and then they'll all waste your time. The way to think about it is, but then when I had our Series A, then it was one call and they were in immediately. Then I had another call with somebody with a similar profile. They were in immediately, just for like first 10 minutes. And so what had happened was that they had heard about us a little bit before, and they were in the right sector. So they're in the sector of dual purpose, knowing that there is defense as a way to de-risk and invest in technologies that can change the future. You look at robots, you look at iRobot, you look at Boston Dynamics, you would look at GPS, you look at computing. All those industries and companies were de-risked by government and then transformed many of their industries. So people who understood that with that investor profile who's savvy in that and can add value. Once I started targeting my time towards them, it was a completely different reaction, I'd say. And so just being educated on being realistic about what is the sector that you're in right now. And what we're in is a very unsexy sector. We help right now soldiers solve really hard problems and save their lives. And that's not very sexy actually to most people. But it's actually very meaningful to the larger context of how our technology could manifest in a consumer world long term, but just not today. And so that is a big lesson learned. And now I'm much more pragmatic about the people I spend my time with, I'd say, and the ones who add value.
That's really helpful advice. And sometimes in some ways, like an emotional roller coaster, everyone's excited in the first 5 minutes and everyone's in, and it can just ebb and flow throughout the process.
Right. I would say the same. Fundamentally, if you can identify a target audience that is interested in your space, it knows something about you, your meetings are going to go somewhere. But to come to your other question, which is how do you think about dilution? And it's a question of dilution versus acceleration. How much juice do you want, and how much of the company are you willing to give up today in order to go a little bit faster? Should you wait? Should you keep the burn rate a little bit lower, go a little bit longer, so that you can push a bigger valuation, have less dilution? So this is something that any ownership team needs to be discussing openly within the board. Our particular founding team has been relatively conservative, not wanting to give up more of the company than necessary. So my job as CEO has been to get lots of companies, lots of investors interested, and to keep the price high so that the dilution that we suffer is relatively modest. So a large part of kissing many frogs has to do with they're interested at price. The question is when does that price work for the existing investors?
And any suggestions from the chat function on our Series A question?
Yep, so it's ranging from 1 million to 1.5 million to 2 million.
For Series A.
Mm-hmm.
Look like a multitasking institute. And this is one of the pieces of advice I always give to founders when they are fundraising is make sure you have your backups. That if something printed, something in your laptop, you can all the numbers that you want. Because what I have, and I'm happy to share this as well with the audience and the panel afterwards too. So the average Series A deal size last year was 10.6 million. Down a little bit from the year before because 2020 was actually a year where it was more challenging for Series A companies to fundraise relative to sort of B, C, D, and beyond. And a lot of that comes down to investors just seeking comfort in the known quantity, particularly in the onset of COVID. Right? There's not as much data and numbers to analyze when you go to raise your Series A as there are from later stage companies. And some VCs just didn't have the ability to meet in person as well. So that was part of it. But not a significant change year on year. Post-money valuation last year for Series A, 46 million versus 44 the year before. The revenue for a Series A company last year, 3.2 million versus 3.8 the year before. And EBITDA margin, and I think this is pretty understandable. Last year was down to 111% versus obviously negative, versus the negative 167 the year before. And a lot of that actually came from efficiencies coming from COVID, right? The message from VCs across the board as soon as the Cait was tighten your belts, cut headcount where you can, really focus on aspects that are going to grow your business. So cutting up, trimming some of the fat really, and also, getting rid of real estate expense where we could. So that's sort of how Series A panned out last year. Happy to share sort of B, C, and D, some of those metrics. I'll touch on Series B when we're here, and again, I can sort of share all this information. And this is coming from SVB's quarterly state of the markets report that we produce. This is specifically tech focused. It's not broken down specifically to robotics, but it's really tech focused.
I think the robotic segment last year was probably a little bit above that norm.
We did some pretty unique fundraising in the space, which was great. Series B last year, 22 million was the average deal size versus 20 the year before. Post-money valuation, 102 million versus 96 the year before. Revenue, 7.2 million versus 6.7 the year before. And the negative EBITDA didn't change as much for Series B companies. It was 121% versus 120 the year before. So some interesting metrics there to share as people think about size of the funding that you do get at various stages across the house as well. So I hope that's helpful. We've talked a lot about the right capital stack, from various components as well. And one of the interesting things when a company raises a Series A, it also opens the world of that debt component. And the reason why it opens it up, because the Series A is typically when a company will bring in its first round of institutional investors, right? And they may come in at the seed stage of the house as well, but VCs tend to come in and really get more of an investment at that Series A. And the companies start to de-risk a little bit more, and then banks start to become a little bit more interested in it. So just a quick synopsis in terms of what it looks like from the debt profile from Series A companies. And typically a company's first round of debt will be alongside a Series A. And how much debt can you get? It's always important not to get as much debt as you absolutely possibly can and leverage up the company. The reason being, when you go to raise your next round, VCs won't want to invest when their dollars will be used to pay the interest on your debt because they're not going to get a return on that. They want to invest in enterprise value. So taking a balanced approach is really important. So when a company raises a Series A, they will typically layer on debt about 20%, perhaps 25% of size relative to the size of the Series A that came in as well. Venture debt is what we call that first type of debt. Is typically an interest-only period and then amortizes over 3 years. There most frequently are no covenants, because what do covenants occur with company too? We don't want to be in a stage where companies are breaching their covenants, calling in debt. Companies don't want to be in that boat either. So that's the typical first type of debt that these companies tend to get. Then as they grow in scale and they tend to have inventory and accounts receivable, we would then layer in additional types of debt, which we call working capital debt. And that is a more economical type of debt that the business tends to somewhat more scale. It's tied to some assets as well, which typically a covenant on it. And then as companies grow and scale, we tend to get more creative as well, layering in past mezzanine debt facilities, syndicated debt facilities, and partnering with providers as well. We work with companies beyond their IPO. We'll do convertible notes before the IPO and after their IPO as well. But just wanted to share that a little bit as well.
Well, it's fair to say that the Series A debt funding that you do, I can say from our point of view, we're just about to open a debt facility with you, by the way, is layered in not because we intend to use it by plan, but to give us runway. If things don't go according to plan, that we've got that buffer as we're out raising a Series B in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, that's very often one of the most accurate sources is sort of that runway extension, and also thinking of it as somewhat of an insurance plan. I don't know if anyone's business plan has ever always gone to plan. It never happens in a company. You're working with all the hardware and frontier tech companies here in New England, and I've run fintech practices in consumer and martech. I'm really surprised if somebody hits their plan, right? So that's not the norm. We like them to, but it's not the norm. So the point being that there should always be the plan B. And for a lot of these companies, the plan B is having a debt facility to fall back on. And one piece of advice I would just give to anyone is don't wait until your runway is too tight, because it's so hard to get debt. So try and do it when you have 9 months of runway, around that time frame or more. The best time to get it, and the easiest time, is when you fundraise. You've already done the diligence, you already have all the information packs. There's a lot of focus on it. It's easier, front of mind for them. That's the easiest time to do it.
I can say it's painless, totally painless to do it then. If you do it 9 months later, it's going to be a fundraise. You're going to go through all of the motions, and you're going to waste a huge amount of time.
Yeah, it's painful.
Peter, I would almost advise, if you're going to do it then. Don't bother later. You may as well just be out fundraising.
Yeah, you may as well. Because when you fundraise, you have everything that your lender needs. Just send it over. Everything is front of mind. It's just an easy sort of tack on. Any other words of wisdom in terms of debt facilities that you've gone through, either this company or prior companies?
We've been running back and forth on a high wire with no safety net while we're juggling knives.
That's great. Yeah, maybe let me think of someone who can finance that. I think we're pretty close in time. Let me do a little bit check here. We've got 5 minutes left. Any other questions?
There's a question. How long would you say is the average to close on a Series A?
It's a little bit about how long is a piece of string. I'll turn it over to you. I spoke to somebody who actually had an incredibly successful company before as well, and he said close to Series A in 6 days. That is not the norm. It does take several months. I heard recently somebody doing it in 2 months. That's not the norm. I would say 6 to 9 months, but would love your feedback. You're closer to it.
Well, let's give it to let's give it to Dexter. He's likely to be the most optimistic.
No. I would say that it's important to always have a little bit of a pulse on the network, right? And so there's soft positioning and soft raising, and then there's like real life. We're trying to raise. And so the key is to just have a pulse, and then to understand when there's momentum building, and then formally say that you're raising. That soft period for us did last for several months, because we also were doing a little bit of understanding how to build up a business model, building up a team as well. So gaining clarity within our own side and really just talking to people just to understand a little bit of refining our identity. But then once we, for example, had an intro to our lead, then it was pretty fast. It was I think 2 months to get it, a month and a half to get a term sheet, and then 5 weeks to close. But there was, again, a lot of frogs that happened before that, but really I was trying to use them to my benefit to be able to understand exactly positioning and timing. So it's by no means a short-term endeavor, but it is also the top role of a CEO, is to ensure the cash flow, whichever color of cash flow there is happening.
Yeah. So our fundraisers have been relatively non-traditional. So we've raised over a longer period of time and done rolling closes. And that's not by design necessarily. Our seed round, no, that was a single shot, and that was raised in about 6 weeks, actually. Our Series A, however, was considerably longer. I want to say 9 months before we got to a final close. So about 3 months to get to an initial close, and then rolling from there. So non-traditional. It gives you the ability to raise at a higher valuation than the market is ready to bear. It allows you to take those who are really hungry for your shares early, and as time goes on, of course, the company becomes more valuable, and it becomes easier for investors to invest. So eventually, you close the round at a valuation that was in your target zone.
And I think it's a skill set that's so important as a CEO is to be a fundraiser. But one, as a first-time CEO, when I was a first Ryden, people don't have that experience before, and it's something that companies don't have to do too many times, or hopefully not too many times. So it's a little bit like interviewing for jobs. A lot of people aren't particularly good at it because they don't do it a whole lot. I mean, if you do a whole lot, maybe there's something wrong there. But any insights in terms of how you became a good fundraiser? It's such an incredible part of being a CEO, and not just at the Series A, because your investors at the C and the Series A want to know that you are the CEO to keep this company to Series B and C and D, as do you.
So I would not claim to be a good fundraiser. I've done a lot of it and over a long period of time, and I've never seen a company, seen one of my startups fail. So in that sense, I'm not a bad fundraiser, but there are people who are way better at adapting their story kind of instantaneously based on the VC that you're talking to. That's not my thing.
My perspective has changed. I think it's meeting an investor is like trying to recruit a high-value candidate. It's like trying to recruit a customer. And if there's alignment, it's pretty quick and it's obvious. And if there isn't alignment, then trying to put the square peg in the round hole is really a waste of time, honestly, for a CEO in any aspect. So I'd say that just being able to have a clear understanding of what your goals are and being transparent about them is really what led me to have greater success. I think of it kind of like relationships, right? Either it's going to fit, or it's going to be a really terrible time trying to make it fit forever, and you'll never get there. So that's how I think about everything now. It's like, okay, either the person's ready to go or they're not, and it just might not be the right timing, or it might not be the right sector, or it might not be the right level of maturity. So ultimately, as there's so much liquidity in the world now, the number of people who are turned on by any particular thing is a larger quantity. So it shouldn't be a problem generally for any technology space at all, even for niche technology like neural interfaces. But it's obvious that the market's investing. So it's really just about finding the right person who is really turned on to that. And then it's pretty quick that there might be a match.
I think we're at time, or possibly even over time. One last quick thing that I'll share too is when you are going into fundraising is really to make sure that you know your numbers and you can stand behind your numbers. VCs do dig into it a lot, and it's really important as a fundraiser to know those numbers. It may bring great comfort and ease to bring your CFO or COO with you, expert and built those numbers. If you don't have a CFO in place, it may be too early. Contract CFOs are really great help, and always feel free to reach out in the audience today and suggestions on that. Well, with that, I think that's a wrap. Thank you all for joining us today. It was a really engaging discussion, and I hope everyone that joined us found some really helpful takeaways.
Thank you. We're going to take a break now, another break, and we will be back at 3:45 with some interesting talk about accelerators and community stuff. So please hang in there. Thanks. Hey everybody, we're about to start back up. So we're next up, we have a discussion around accelerators and incubators and the value of mentors and community that act as fertilizer for your goals. So you really need this to kind of, you can kind of see there's a lot of camaraderie in that panel. You can kind of see getting to know people is very important. So I'd like to introduce Ignacio, Castro, and Joe Botsch, our partners at the Founders Institute, to talk about that. So we can take it away.
You are both muted. Can you turn on your microphones, please?
There you go. I think I just did it. Thank you. And we want to do some screen sharing here. So let me see, where do we do that? There you go. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, so let me put this into presentation mode. Perfect. So thank you very much, Russo and the MassRobotics teams for having us. It's been a long day. We're at the tail end, but we wanted to talk about accelerators and incubators. And I feel like we've been through kind of a mini accelerator today with all the different topics that we cover, which is similar to what you're going to see that we cover in accelerators in general. And we're going to talk about accelerators, but we're going to do it through the lens of Founder Institute, which is the organization that Joe and I represent. And we are not going to touch a lot into incubators. I personally am not a big fan of incubators. I feel like founders usually, entrepreneurs usually spend too much time in incubators, and there's not a kind of a forcing function or a structured program that you go through in incubators, but it's a place for a specific type of companies. I mean, when you think about deep tech and others, I mean, I think there's a space for this type of organizations, but we are more into accelerators, which is programs that usually force you to kind of go through a lot of work and kind of a scope in terms of what you're trying to do to build your company in a very little time, right? So that's kind of what we what we try to do with our founders in our programs. So let me see. This is our team. Sorry about that. This is our team, and myself. My name is Ignacio Castro. I'm the Boston Managing Director for Founder Institute. I've been in the IT and financial services industries for a while, and I've been with Founder Institute since 2013, running these accelerator programs in Boston and also initially in Costa Rica, where I'm originally from, and really enjoy doing this. So I'll give it back to Joe now to introduce himself. Go, Joe. You wanna go? Are you getting out of mute in this webinar is not easy. Joe, are you there? Okay.
Yep, I think it's just the audio source, I think, because he is unmuted, so I think.
Is this better?
Okay. Oh, there you go, Joe.
Yeah.
Please. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. My name's Joe. I've been with Founder Institute about 2 years now, and have been working with early stage founders for about 7 years now, with everything from product design and UI UX to helping them design their back-end data infrastructure. I'm an engineer by training. To now being an investor with OpenView, which is an enterprise SaaS fund out of Boston. Yeah, that's sort of the long and short of it. I've been around the accelerator space for quite some time with groups like Founder Institute, MassChallenge, and Techstars. So I've seen the ins and outs for the different benefits that it can have for every type of startup, from a social impact group to a robotics company like you guys.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. And Ross and Maggie are also part of our team. And they've been with us for some time as well. So just a quick word about Founder Institute. We are kind of the largest pre-seed startup accelerator, and we are in 90 plus countries around the world. We've been out working on this for 10 plus years now, and just a massive number of portfolio companies that we have, the number of mentors globally, and kind of and we are just the Boston team, but we have teams across all the different continents, which is a very important element when you are looking at these programs. Usually these programs, accelerators, are kind of time-based, and there's a time component that you kind of where you go through the accelerator, but you are going to be running your company for a long time. So you have to think, when you look at the accelerators, kind of what the support they give you when you finish the program, right? So it's not just what you get for the, I don't know, the few weeks, months that you are in the accelerator. You have to think about how they help you going forward when you are looking at the different accelerators that you're going to be evaluating for your company. And again, this is just an example of kind of the structure that usually accelerators have, right? So in our case, and this is kind of the actually our plan for this fall that we have, and we're kind of shameless plug. We are recruiting. We are looking for companies and founders for our program. But in general, and that's why I was mentioned at the beginning. I mean, I feel like we went through a mini accelerator today because we were talking about things like marketing, things like IP, things like all the incorporation. So all of those topics are very important when you're starting your company, and that's the kind of things that we cover in our program. But every accelerator has their own kind of framework, their own structure, and it's important that you take a look and see if it's what you need, depending on the stage and kind of the I mean, at the level of, or kind of in the moment of the journey that you're in, if the accelerator is the right fit for you. And this is a slide that I really like because, I mean, to the previous comment, right? I mean, there's different accelerators or different type of organizations or initiatives or events that you have, depending on the stage in which you are. So, for example, if you are really starting with an idea and kind of even looking at if the idea makes sense or not, things like these programs that we have in the ideation phase, like Startup Weekend, the Capital Network, and others, are really good spaces for you to kind of go meet others, kind of share your idea, and kind of start getting some feedback. So that's a very important component of the ecosystem. And then you have the validation space, which I think there's not a lot of people working in the space. And then you have more the early growth and expansion. So this is where most of the activity is, and this is because at early growth and expansion, a lot of the risk of validating an idea, it's already, I mean, has been, you have the risk, basically, your business, your idea, because you have gone through the ideation and validation, right? So at this point, you already have you usually have a team, you usually have traction, and then is where most of the support happens for startups. But going through the first two stages is usually the hardest part, and you have to figure out what kind of support you get in these stages. And there's a number of resources to help you kind of navigate the ecosystem and kind of try to figure out what support you need or what kind of help you need. In the Founder Institute, we have something called Startup Ecosystem Canvas, and this is something that we have for every single city and market in which we operate. So this is just a screenshot from our website. You can go there to this URL, and you will see that we have mappings of the ecosystems for many different cities. And what we do is usually kind of divide this. We have a framework in which we divide the ecosystem in different stages, different types of supporters, and kind of even success stories, which is how we do this kind of mapping and this kind of exercise. So, and again, I'm just giving you a quick summary of what we have, but there's a whole framework around how we do this mapping and how you should think about the different type of resources that you need depending on which stage you are. And feel free to jump in with questions. I mean, we put together some material for this, and I'm not sure we are going to be able to cover everything. But if you have specific questions that you have, feel free to put it in the chat or in the question section. And Russell, please let us know if we need to stop for any specific question. But in terms of all these resources, we are not the only ones who have this type of mapping of the ecosystems, right? There's plenty of other organizations. Usually each city has their own organization that is looking into mapping this or guide entrepreneurs and founders through all these resources. So this is a list that we have of resources that we feel like are very useful, and we can definitely have this available for anyone that is interested. I'm calling out here in the bottom the one from the Capital Network, which there's a great organization in Boston, and they've been mapping. They have this list of accelerators. This is US wide, and you will find a lot of details of the sector stage. I mean, equity taken. There's a lot of information here that you will find, and it's a great resource. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joe to cover some of the next slides. Joe, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, before you guys even start thinking about applying to different accelerators or any other type of program, it's important to take a step back and think about, creating different MVPs of your products, kind of going back to what Cait was saying about being in the discovery stage of your process. And there's different groups in the city of Boston, a few of them listed here that you guys can take advantage of. Artisans Asylum being one. It's a 501c3 organization that you guys can go to and kind of start prototyping and playing around and trying to start testing out some of the ideas that you guys have. Same with Cambridge Hackspace It's another group that, offers maker spaces and offers fabrication that you guys can take advantage of. And Boston Makers is another major component of that. So being able to have some type of working prototype or working tests as you're filling out some of the applications for these accelerators is super important. And these groups are there for exactly that purpose. They're all very collaborative and very responsive, and they're all just starting to open now after COVID. So as you guys start to, reopen up and think about taking these steps, these are really great resources to take advantage of.
Can we go to next
Yeah.
slide?
And to kind of zero in on some of the more prominent hardware accelerators that are out there, some of the big ones that I've worked with in the past and have seen that I really like are Hacks and New Lab. So Hacks is a venture fund / accelerator out of San Francisco, and they offer about a 12-week program where they kind of take you from cradle to grave, from idea to funding, and offer de-risking in the scalability of your robotics platform. They talk you through the best practices for marketing, positioning, salesmanship, and they also have spaces on campus where they have engineers there to work with you to help you build your physical products. So being able to go from MVP and early stage to trying to raise a small pre-seed to seed round, Hacks is a great program that has spun out some major names that you guys might have heard of. Things like Form Labs started out with Hacks. Another one that I like a lot is New Lab out of Brooklyn. So New Lab is kind of a bunch of different things rolled into one. They're both an accelerator, a venture fund, and a studio, which I'll get into in a minute. But New Lab has everything from wet lab space to manufacture your own fuel, to a built-in 5G network in their buildings, to access to the Brooklyn Navy Yard to be able to put things in the water. Things like Sea Machines Robotics started out there. So there's a bunch of different groups that are sort of on the East Coast, West Coast, and everywhere in between that have the infrastructure in place that, you guys can go to them after playing around in a makerspace for a little while and start really trying to put the pedal to the metal and start, manufacturing a scalable solution. Next slide, please, Ignacio.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing that I briefly kind of wanted to get into, with all the talk of accelerators and incubators and the like, there's another alternative, venture studios, where there's a massive talent shortage for everything from data engineering to hardware solutions to people that can do fabrication. And what a lot of different groups are doing is they're incubating ideas in studios. So they'll find a lot of talented individuals like yourself, and they'll start almost team first and decide on an idea to work with. So groups like New Lab kind of follow this process here, where they'll work with a corporate partner, think Ensign or Verizon or Orsted, that want to do things around robotics, and they'll recruit, smart individuals to start working on some of those challenges that they have, and they'll start companies over the course of a summer. So starting out with alignment on problem and focus areas, to research, to figuring out, the viability of being able to solve a specific challenge, convening with corporate partners to decide what the best course of action is, flowing into, okay, let's build it. We have an idea to improve 5G networks or, wind turbines on the ocean, and then piloting, running a full scale project and building a startup with some of these major corporate partners. So this is a great alternative if you might be a solo founder or you just kind of want to get your feet wet with startups. Venture studios are a very interesting way and a new fad that's kind of emerging.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. And I wanted to also go back for just a minute, right? And we've been talking about accelerators, and before we go to some of the other slides that we have, and we didn't think about this before, but I really like also the concept that I think MassRobotics has, which is the concept of the accelerator, right? The escalator, sorry. So the escalator is something different, and I was not sure if it was kind of covered before the session today or it's going to cover later, but Definitely kind of a robotics company is a different type of company because of the different challenges that it has, and then it was covered before in some of the panels. So I think MassRobotics brings a very specific lens to the robotics startups and companies that is very useful and unique, and I think but I think it's kind of sometimes goes beyond kind of the typical early stage accelerator, and it's kind of some of the options that we have talked to eventually kind of feed into what MassRobotics provides. But I just wanted to kind of mention that. So Russell, just wanted to check on time because we have a few other slides here, but I don't know how much time we have.
We have about 2 more minutes, so feel free, you can go over these slides. I think it's you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, so we have a few more slides here. I will probably cover just this one. I don't think we have time for more, but when you think about accelerators, I mean, think about, I mean, there's no such a thing as a free lunch, right? As I have it here, and there's always something, right? I mean, like we all talk about Facebook, I mean, being free, right? I mean, if you are getting something free, the product is probably you, right? So in some cases, when you look at accelerators, you have to think about what you're given instead of in exchange of what you are going to be receiving, and then when usually around accelerators, there's equity exchange, so that's something that you have to be very careful with. But also it's about your time, right? It's about your focus, right? It's kind of where the bottom comment here that I have, right? Is very important that I mean, you spend your time in your company very wisely, and you are focusing what really matters. And sometimes trying to apply it for a lot of these accelerators is it feels like you are kind of it feels good, right? It feels like you might be getting to some of these accelerators, but at the end of time could be a distraction. So especially if you are not applying for a program that you are a good fit for. So just keep that in mind. The other thing that we accelerators do, and that's why I'm doing this no filters advice, is we usually cast a wide net, right? I mean, we are looking for a lot of founders, and we want to choose out of every single application that we get the best ones, right? So we don't have an incentive to kind of to narrow down those filters. So it's up to the founder to really kind of make sure that they know what the criteria is, they know what they're looking for, so that whenever you are applying, you try to make sure that you are really a good fit, so that you don't waste your time. And again, we have a few more slides in terms of kind of different advice that we have, but we can provide these slides, and then I'm happy to connect with anyone that is interested or have questions about accelerators or Founder Institute, and happy to help in any way we can.
Yeah, it's great. It's important to kind of understand, you know, it's like, what do you need as a startup and what different phases? Like, you might have a team, but you might not have the skills in terms of just, you might not know, you know, counting. You can hire a company, you can learn it yourself, even the tools as well. You know, if you need a CNC, you know, some places will have that, some places won't. So it really depends on what you need. You have to shop around kind of in the, you know, and MassRobotics, we're pretty agnostic in the industry. So, you know, we you know, we understand that startups, they might need different resources and all that stuff. So thank you again, Ignacio and Joe, for talking.
Thank you.
Next up, to highlight the importance of networking in the industry, I'd like to introduce Dan Cara, Vice President of Robotics and Intelligent Systems at WTWH Media. Dan's been in this space for quite a while, so he's familiar with your face to a lot of people, I'm sure. You can have it, Dan.
How you doing? I want to show my screen. Great. Can people? Can people see this presentation?
Yep, and we can hear you. All set.
All set, great. Let me just get it running. How's that? Nice and clear?
Great.
Okay, so starting your own robotics company. First, before we begin, I'd really like to thank Russell and Joyce and Tom for inviting me to be here today. This has been very interesting. I've been on since the beginning. Interesting talk, great topic. And we're here to speak about networking and in some respects hiring. But before we do, there's a couple of questions we need to ask and into some points to kind of make in terms of what do we mean by networking? Well, it can be two different things. One is to build a network for your company or for yourself, and sort of to grow that network of people or groups that know about you. And the second one is to just the process of interacting with a network. And so we can cover, if you keep that in the back of your mind as we go through some of this. And then also you should think about why you would want to network in the first place. Why are we doing this? Well, certainly it's not a hobby. We're not doing it because we're looking for a life partner. There's a reason for that, that we're trying to brand yourself or your company, or for branding or for marketing, for sales, or for attracting people to the company to hire them, or attracting investors to the company as well. So we'll talk about all those different facets as we move forward. Okay, well, there's a couple of different ways that you can brand yourself, actually, and brand your company for both approaches. One would be through B2B media, which I'm intimately involved with and knowledgeable of. Social media, you can do it through industry events. You can also do it through professional associations, user groups, colleges and universities, as well as clusters. So the more important thing is what we're trying to do here is to make you or your company bigger than you are as a startup. For larger companies, this isn't a problem. They have people that can handle all this for them. But as a startup, particularly if it's a seed round or an A round, you don't have a whole lot of money for marketing and haven't hired a separate marketing person or separate marketing group, it's a little bit more difficult. But there's much that you can do on your own, and much of it has no costs involved. But it's important to notice that this is a multivariate process, and that the effects are felt when you add all these different types of things in. It's also important to note that when you're networking yourself or your company, you don't really have to focus on robotics per se. That in fact, as you work through B2B marketing or events or through your cluster or through professional groups, that you can work through the enabling technologies that support your particular product or your particular service. So for example, that you can, in terms of events or publications or whatever, if your solution, your product or services uses machine learning or deep learning, you can focus on that and push it that way. Your message, motion control, localization, navigation, all these different types of capabilities or enabling technologies that go into your particular product or service. So you can work in that way. You don't have to be talking about whole cloth robotics when you're looking to get out there and make you and your company known. It's also important that you're not actually even limited to technology. So you have your product or solution you could talk about. You could talk about the enabling technologies that make it up. But you can also talk about the different vertical market segment that you're targeting if you're a company that's doing something like that. So for example, if it's many of the technologies, say for a sensing solution, can be used across a variety of different types of vertical markets. For different types of applications, but some are very, very specific. So for example, in the Boston area, particularly the cluster is very, very strong in AMRs and AGVs for logistics work, particularly for fulfillment. So you can focus on logistics publications, or if you're focusing on manufacturing your particular solution, say it's an articulated arm or a new type of gripper or some sort of visioning system for manufacturing, you can go and target manufacturing publications, manufacturing events, manufacturing social media, and it works through all the different things. So for example, if you're developing an early stage surgical robotic interventional system, well, then you can work through manufacturing as well. And you're not even limited to vertical market segments. You can work through on a per application basis. So for example, it could be something like feeding, machine tending for CNC machines, for example, and actually get the message out that way. So there's a number of different approaches that you can take, even before you began to look at the various ways of which you can actually build your network and interact with your network. So let's start at robotics clusters. Thankfully, here in the Boston area, we're in one of the leading clusters, robotics clusters in the world, and I would argue and can back that up that Boston is the leading robotics cluster in the world, and that's even including some of the clusters that are basically complete government initiatives. But it's important that you work, and we'll talk about this being located in a geographic area where there's all these different support services, such as funding and some of the companies that spoke a little bit earlier about today. It's also important that some of these particular clusters are linked specifically to accelerators, and we heard a presentation just previous to this one, as well as some mentions of it in other presentations as well, that are tied in with that cluster. Some of the clusters will offer relocation initiatives to bring you there. So something like the Osaka cluster in Japan has strong initiatives, Singapore does, Odense in Denmark, Robodalen in Sweden will actually support you actually to come there to join their cluster, and they're doing this for their own internal purposes. It's also important if you're looking to say, well, if I need to be located physically to a cluster, even in this day and age with all the communications that we have, which cluster do I choose? And some of it's based on the type of robotic system that you're building. So if we go back to the earlier example of logistics systems with autonomous mobile robots, Boston is a great place to be at. In fact, it's great for a number of different things, sensing technologies, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. But if you were doing, for example, creating a solution that would do something like iron ore mining or something like that, you would probably look to Australia for that type of cluster, because they're very, very focused on that. And some of these clusters have these areas of focus. Odense, Denmark, for example, focusing on collaborative robots as well. So all of them have their typical strengths, and that's something you should be aware of. Again, we're very, very lucky to have the Boston cluster for those of us who are living in this area. And this particular program is a good example why you would want to do that. So what does that give you in terms of again, building your network and then integrating your networking with your network? Well, there's a number of different sources for support and networking. We're typically as startups talking about emerging companies, but all those support firms for IP, the support firms in terms of and other legal services for marketing, but also things such as design engineering services firm or manufacturing engineering services firms, for example, are located within these clusters. And you have a variety of different champions. There's universities and research centers, large companies. There's also a whole pile of people that you can hire for your company, or you can interact or network with for your company. So there's many, many advantages. Again, I will impress upon you this notion of being within a similar geographic network. The rule of thumb is a 50-mile rule, and there's some examples here with Boston in the lower left-hand side, but also Toronto and certainly Denmark. This seems to be a general kind of rule of thumb in terms of getting maximal support from your cluster is to be somewhat near it, even in this day with all the capabilities for interaction with people throughout the world very, very easily. It also maps down to some things as well in terms of saying getting certain classes of investment. I know the Valley is very, very strong in that. In some cases with robotics companies, they've even had to mandate that the company should be located close to the source of the investment. That's becoming less of an issue now. So the big powerhouses for robotics investment, the Boston area, the San Jose area, in some cases, it's mandated that you actually have to be there. So something you might want to consider if you're looking at for cluster support as a way to build your network or interact with your network. Some of the capabilities that you get here, we kind of rambled through these before. There's workforce development capabilities. There's just many, many more people. There's investment. There's business development opportunities. There's a pile of companies, education, and a pile of other things, including things such as just cocktail receptions and meetings as well. So They're difficult to quantify and sometimes they're even hard to identify, but these are real nonetheless, and they can give your startup to act as a little bit of a tailwind to give you just an edge among all the other groups that are out there. Now let's speak a little about B2B media. B2B media for a startup is dramatically different than, say, a much larger company who can, by virtue of the company's name or their reputation or by the people who run it, can get a lot of column inches in the digital press or even in print press for whatever. You see some examples of that on the left-hand side with some of the business books, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Forbes, so on and so forth, where they'll write about your particular company and get it out. These companies don't need the same help a startup does. They have people that can do this. And then you can see there's something from the robot report, but that's a $500 million IPO. If you look at the other two columns, however, these are ways that companies can get their message out that is low cost or no cost. So some in the middle examples here are announcements of just raising either B rounds or A rounds or whatever from a number of different companies, some more startup-y than others. Neurala's been around for a while with 12 million, Realtime Robotics, just June of this year, 31 million, but Dusky Robotics out in the Bay Area, 16 million. So getting this out, people will see this, they're looking at a company, they know that's a company on the move. So if you're looking to hire people, this is important. And in terms of investors, as you go for that next round, or if you're looking for partners, for example, this is another important way of getting that message out. On the right-hand side, this is actually examples of contributed content. Again, no cost for this. The cost is sweat equity. And these are examples of articles about startups in the lower right-hand side, or in the upper one, it's written by a startup and then included, in this case, Robotics Business Review. Again, it's important to note that the B2B robotics publications that were mentioned a couple of presentations ago when they were talking about marketing is actually looking and thirsting for high quality content. So if you can deliver something that speaks to issues that resonate with a certain community and demographic that you're looking at, or that the publication is looking for, and can deliver that in a high quality way, publications are quite willing to work with you in order to get that message out. They need your content and they need fresh eyes and fresh opinions about that marketplace, and quite willing to work with you in order to do that. Some other examples here, and I'm tooting my horn a little bit here on the right-hand side with the logo, but it just gives you some examples. On the left-hand side, these are startup profiles. Again, all of this is free. This is for Ava Robotics. There's one for Waypoint Robotics, and then Farm Droid. I think they might be out in either France or on the West Coast. Is examples, again, no cost. What's important to note with these things is that in any of these publications, it's not just a matter of the publication anymore, because the publications are acting in some way just as a database. It's the extra social media push and through marketing that you get through social media channels, newsletters, and other types of things that actually drive eyeballs to whatever has been posted by you, whether you wrote it or not. So again, it's not just a one-off that you get this stuff. I know for the startup profiles, for example, that's marketed in actually two typically binges of marketing, one that goes out through sort of traditional marketing, and then there's guerrilla marketing that's pushed out as well. Same thing with podcasts. Here's some podcasts here for the robot report that's listed on the right, some examples from Boston-based companies, Locust Robotics and Turtle, as well as others. Now it's just assume, well, these are all big companies. That's not the case with Turtle. Again, the people who put on these podcasts in many cases are looking for people to get on there. In some cases, they get a little bit desperate because a lot of people are doing it. So if someone was proactive, say a hungry startup, could actually reach out to the people who put on these podcasts and actually get into the stream of things so that they can go out and get their message out and brand themselves personally, as well as brand their product or solution or service or whatever. And again, by doing this, they not only promote themselves in terms of their brand and marketing, but also pushes sales. It opens up opportunities for investment, and it opens up opportunities for new hires. People want to go where they see things are happening. One way to show that things are happening is to work with B2B media, which can be low cost or no cost. Some other examples is through social media. There's some comments on this.
One time, if you could just wrap up in a minute or so, please.
Yeah, sure. You can work through social media. Here's some examples here, which is important. Is not so much Twitter and LinkedIn, which you can also hire through, but also a variety of robotics groups. Here's some examples. You notice members 23,000, 16,000, 18,000, so on and so forth. There's about 40 of them just tied into robotics that I know of. Same thing with events. These were designed for networking, so it gives you an opportunity to either sales or branding or marketing, whatever, but sign on for the newsletters to get updates to these things, and then apply to speak. Again, companies are looking for new voices and ways of getting out there. It's a great way to build your network or work with your network. Same thing with universities as well. There's networking opportunities are not based on the location of the institution. So for example, MIT has a MIT group of Northern California. There's great opportunities there for getting articles written by the university, even if after you left, and to go out to those publications at the university, which then go out to the larger B2B media. Same thing with professional associations, dedicated specialized pricing and programs for startups, virtually all of them here. So these are willing to work with you. In some cases, it'll be low cost in order to do that. So then finally, the last slide. It's an all hands on deck opportunity here. Startups don't have a whole lot of money. There's things that you can do. A confluence of factors all push this forward. You can join and exploit clusters. There's no cost networking opportunities via B2B media, social media for networking and for hiring. And then certainly with events, that's what they're designed for networking, building, branding, sales, and hiring. There's opportunities there. Many of them, or most of them, are not tied to sponsorship, university groups, and then even other opportunities. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody very much, and look for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, cool. Yeah, we're going to jump into the next session. We're a little bit behind. Thank you, Dan. That was a great review. Networking is really important, really good to get know people. And it's interesting, even when you have a failure or something, say you do have a startup, you'll know a ton of people and they'll want to hire you into a new startup, which isn't the prettiest thing you want to hear about, but it's a truth. Knowing people is very important in the industry. So now finally, we're going to kind of close it out. Once you get traction at that initial big deal, your company needs to start delivering. So things can move quickly and you need to scale your business to meet demands. So I'd like to introduce a longtime friend of MassRobotics, mentor to many startups, and formerly with Mass MVP, Peter Russo, who will help you prepare for questions of scalability, specifically in manufacturing. So take it away, Peter.
Thank you, Russell. I'm assuming my screen is showing at this point?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for sticking in there. At this point, if we were in real life together, I'd say everyone take the front chairs, move forward, everybody. And I'll say the same thing now with all of you. Reduce my screen on the slides. The slides aren't important. I want to have a talk with you. There's probably 20, 25 people left. Thank you for sticking it out. This is a wonderful event. And let me tell you, I want to start out in looking at this slide. This is about starting a robotics company. But what I want to say to you is not everyone starts a company that does everything from product through manufacturing and sales. There are almost 3 different types of activities and talents, and different people like different things. Let me tell you, even if you have an idea for a product and just a single product, there's lots of ways that you can both achieve your mission, if it's a mission-based thing that you're trying to do, or make money. I ran a product development company for 25 years, and I licensed hundreds of products and made over $5 million in royalties in addition to the development fees. So I was a royalty-based person. And I went through and made the recommendations and helped consult on the manufacturing. Actually, over time, I did more and more of the manufacturing because I had more and more experience. But people will license ideas oftentimes, or you can go ahead through manufacturing and sell it through other people's channels, or you can build your whole company that has everything soup to nuts. But I just want to remind you that it's not a necessity to do all of that. So let's talk about manufacturing your product, no matter whether it's a single item that you end up licensing to somebody or whether you're going to build a company off of it. And I did build 3 companies also and was able to sell them. But I have to tell you, I love developing the product a lot more and then making it someone else's problem when it becomes inventory and sales. But I'm going to talk to you very briefly about you're starting out with an idea, you're moving on to prototypes, onto a pilot or a beta prototype, and then finally scaling. So, oh, it's not moving forward. Oh, there it is. So, you know, start with the customer. You heard that from Cait at the beginning of this. If you were started at the beginning of this session, all the way through Linda, Dan, everyone says start with the customer. Start with the customer's need in mind. The if you build it, they will buy scenario happens, but it's rare. You're much better off starting out with a customer need that hasn't been met. Then search for similar product. Oh, and when I say similar product, not just, gee, did someone already think of this for this solution, but similar product technologically. In fact, the product on the screen that's in this, it's not a robotics product, but it's a product that I did years ago. People who knit buy big skeins of yarn, and then they have to bring them down to little manageable size skeins because yarn is very inexpensive in these big skeins, and you bring it down to the little one. And what you would do is you see in the old movies, somebody standing there with their hands and someone's wrapping yarn around. It's crazy to do it that way. So this device winds yarn into small balls from a big ball. And what this invention is basically the mechanism for a fishing reel. So, you know, you're trying to wind something and you think to yourself, what else winds? I don't want to have to invent this whole product out myself. Winding, there's different devices that wind. One of them's a fishing reel. That becomes a part of this product. And it doesn't, that you have to look and make sure you're not violating any patents. I mean, Linda gave the discussion on patents, but in most instances, something will have been around like a fishing reel for 100 years, and you can use that mechanism within your invention. So keep that in mind. Think like a customer. Always think about in the customer's perspective, but act like a researcher. You know, do your homework, be objective, go beyond what you want it to be as a customer and think in a broader sense. Is it's marketable, branding and so forth. And then once you have that, and by the way, buy other people's items and strip them down so you can understand. You want to invent as little as possible, quite frankly. You want to be, if you want to be successful in the least amount of time. You heard about fail fast and fail cheap. Well, I say succeed fast and succeed cheap. Okay, so look at what other people have done, and then express your idea. Express your idea in the form that best relates to the customer need. Moving on, so you're going to build a prototype after that. So you've done your homework, you've kind of illustrated things, you've laid it out, you've thought about customers, you've done your research, you've looked at competition, you start building your prototype. Use off-the-shelf parts, okay? I've seen people actually design gears. Well, gears are the hardest thing in the world to manufacture. Use a gear that's off the shelf. McCaster car, one of the general use catalogs that you can get product off of. Focus on the function first. Don't try to make everything pretty and in its right format. Focus on function first. Leverage additive manufacturing, 3D printing, and so forth. But be careful. Make sure you know what manufacturing processes you're eventually going to get into, because you don't want to make something with 3D printing that can then never be made in a mass production manner. People say, how do I find my manufacturer? Don't Google to find your manufacturer. Talk to people. You Google later. You Google when you're trying to get a price 3 years down the line when your product is stable. Right now, you use that community that Dan just talked about, and you say, who do you have? Who do you know? Because that community of manufacturers oftentimes love startups. They energize their own company. When a startup comes in and talks about their product, they present good challenges. They'll be your mentor, and find mentor and talk to those people. Think about the materials, as I said, don't 3D print yourself into a corner. Think about your materials, your manufacturing process while you're building that prototype. And they already talked about, the group talked about all the spots that Artisan Asylum and different people, and then Proto Lab and places that you can get help. So I won't go too deep into it. So now you have your idea, you presented it and works like, you know that the mechanism can work. Now you're developing the looks like. Now you really have to get your customer involved because you have to understand the lifestyle. You can't produce a product that then can't be used out of the isolation of your laboratory. You know, you have to understand the life cycle. Where do they store it? How's it going to be shipped? Where does the customer store it when they get it? Who uses it? How many different people use it? Is there a difference in the people? Is there a size difference, physical size difference, a knowledge difference? How does it have to be programmed, maintained, repaired? Think of all those aspects of it. Talk to your customer about all those things, and there's even more. Then you move on to exploring the design for manufacturing. People talk about design for manufacturing, but I like the word design for X because there's about a dozen really important X's when you're manufacturing. There's assembly, which, you know, if you don't do it in advance, you could end up with 22 screws instead of 4 screws, and that makes the difference between your product cost, especially if you're producing in the US, maybe the difference between $1 in cost of assembly and $4 cost of assembly. So you want to design for assembly, robustness, design to test it so that as it's being manufactured, each part is tested rather than testing it at the end when your whole product is no good. And you have to go back and try to find the issue. And design for environment. I had a trucking product, holy smokes. The underneath of a truck, it's encrusted with like an inch of white stuff after the winter. You have to know those things, safety, cost, supply chain. Right now, supply chains is crazier than it's ever been. Leverage the knowledge of your contractor. Like I said, get a recommendation, get an introduction to a contractor, and then don't use the manufacturer for price and those questions. Use them for knowledge first. They know they can help you they can save you more money by helping you understand your manufacturing than they can by you trying to get a great price on volume before you even have volume. And then build your looks like model. Consider that it's going to change over time and changes that you might need as you go from you're going to go from 1 to, you know, making sure I have it here. I'm sorry, I didn't move the slide forward when I was talking about that. Anyway, let's move forward. Developing the looks like model. Like I said, we had that. My own face is in the way of my slides on my deck. Let me see if I can fix that for a second. Sorry about that.
Peter, if you hit the little red arrow at the top, it'll collapse the panel.
There it is. Got it. Thank you, whoever that was. So you get a plan for scale, the 10, the 100, the 1,000, the 2,000. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna move kind of quickly through this. But you got a plan because those manufacturers in processes may change. But you don't want to, again, you don't want to make it so you can't move on to the next process. You want the materials in the process, test run. Know that you're going to change your product. Get at least 10 of anything into the hands of the actual user before you go into any kind of mass production. Wrapping up now, scale is the last thing. As you scale up, consider your long-term business strategy. Do you want to sell this business? Or do you want to sell the product? Are you going to license the product? Are you going to build it and keep it forever? Think about that. And by this point, before you scale, you should have changed into from a development team of people looking for the best way to do the next thing and making changes to, we got a minimal viable product, or we have a viable product, or we have a saleable product. We're going to turn into a commercial organization focused on selling, getting it out there, and then listening to the customer to revise it. And then the make buy considerations for where you make it. My only thing about considerations of where you make it, I had an office in Shenzhen, China. I had an office in Japan at one time. I've made things in other countries. There's good reasons to do it. There's a lot of reasons not to do it. If you can make it in your backyard, you're best off. To be able to walk over, drive over, or at least fly over in a short period of time to where they're making your product can make a huge difference to the success of your product. So just to give you an idea of just seeing it visually as you're identifying that need, this is a different product that I made within the hobby industry. It's a sewing industry item. Identify the need, create the concept that you think you want to be. Then you're going to engineer all those parts, you're going to prototype it, and finally you're going to produce it. So I know I rushed through that. Let me tell you, particularly because I know we're down to not a huge audience, call me anytime. Email me if I can help you in any way. Please let me know. Like I said, I spent my first 25 years trying to make as much money as I could. I was very fortunate and did make some. Spent the last 10 doing mission-based things, helping accelerators, helping startups, and working on clean energy. So thank you very much. And Russell, I think that's probably the best time to sign off.
All right, thanks, Peter. Yeah, it's great. It's great to see like the progress, like, you know, kind of, this is the taste of the big, you know, picture when you actually get your product out and running and all the stuff that comes with it. I've seen it. There's so many companies you start up, you have an eager team building things, and then, you know, when it comes time to, hey, we got to sell this, we can't stop revising it. You know, you can't, every time you make a change to a cast or mold, that is tons of money. So stuff you got to think about, really have to plan it out carefully and be aware of that. So with that said, thank you all for attending today's sessions. Thank you all to all of our presenters. As a reminder, we'll have a recording of today's session posted on our YouTube channel. Please follow us on social media and sign up to receive our newsletter to keep dates on upcoming events and other things that are happening in the space. So we have a Healthcare Catalyst program that just started that you can see on our website. We're also having a large, exciting event in the Seaport, a block party in October 2nd that's coming up. We're planning, so lots of stuff. We always have stuff going on. Thank you, everybody, again, and good luck. Hopefully you can build your business, or at least you know where to go now. So thanks, everybody. Bye.